No matter how many times Inez said she didn't kill her husband, nobody believed her. The courtroom, where she was on trial for murder, felt like a stage set up to prove her guilt, like a theater with a pre-written script. One guy testified that this woman herself said she'd take care of her husband and see him again soon. Another claimed Inez was always unhappy with her husband, painting a picture of a hysterical wife for everyone there. A third swore this woman had a small birthmark on her thigh, and that was enough to prove they were connected. The men insisted she was a loose woman, judging her behavior and the way she looked. Another person testified that Inez bought oil at his shop that day, and the owner saw her and her husband heading up the mountain together. But afterwards, Inez came down alone. Every witness tried to convince the judge our main character was a criminal, but it was all a pack of lies. Because Inez didn't kill Joseph, she was innocent and suffering from a gross miscarriage of justice. The woman flinched when the judge barked her name, her heart hammering in her chest. Inez screamed, saying there's no way she did it, her voice cracking with despair and hurt. The judge believes the defendant not only torched her husband's body, but she's got the gall to deny it. Therefore, by the power vested in the court by the water goddess Hyraxia, Inez Benoa is sentenced to 30 years in Romfeld. This decision sealed the main character's fate. Everyone in the courtroom wanted the poor woman to just drop dead, saying she wasn't even worth the rotten scraps they fed her. And just like that, Inez landed in Romfeld, where every single day felt like a living hell of suffering and degradation. In this place, she had to eat food thrown to her like she was a dog, stuff that no human being should ever have to touch. Her body constantly ached and screamed from back-breaking labor, leaving her feeling completely drained and broken. Here, the prisoners lived in constant fear of the absolute power that could crush them at any moment. People's souls were dying, numb to everything, but Inez kept telling herself she had to hold on to life. These endless hellish days dragged on for 10 years. Until one day, the newspaper reported that the new emperor, who had ascended the throne, was granting special pardons to criminals. That's when Inez Benoit was asked to accept an order from the emperor. The woman was granted her freedom, and for the first time in a long time, she could see the bright light, which momentarily blinded her. Before she could leave, a prison worker called out to our girl. He handed Inez a letter, explaining that a woman claiming to be her maid had tearfully begged him to deliver this message. The main character took the note surprised, and then she thanked Homer for his care and kindness. The man left, leaving Inez outside the prison gates, where a new chapter of her life was about to begin. A warm, genuine smile spread across the woman's lips, because now she understood Susan hadn't forgotten her, and that hope warmed her heart, filling it with joy. But the letter's contents hit our girl like a ton of bricks, freezing her in her tracks. Her eyes darted back and forth, rereading the lines, trying to process every single word. Susan wrote about their mother's passing, the family's downfall, and their father taking his own life. Just when she thought she was out of the woods, another nightmare begins, like some unseen force was waiting for it. A voice echoed in Inez's head, insisting that all these people died because of her, and the choices she made that led to this mess. There's no going back. Now she's all alone, like a lost bird without a nest. She's the one who killed them all, her husband, her mother, and her father, and that guilt crushed her soul. The voice kept repeating itself, and she grabbed her head, unable to bear the torment any longer. The noise in my head just kept getting louder and louder. Inez took off running, sprinting into the woods, hoping to escape that awful voice in her head. But no matter how hard she tried, the noise wouldn't leave her alone, chasing her like a shadow she couldn't shake. Suddenly, a light appeared from beyond the dense trees, making Inez slow down, and the voice in her head quieted. Not seeing the tree root under her feet, she tripped and lost her balance. She crashed hard onto the ground, feeling a sharp pain shoot through her. Her whole body was shaking, but she still lifted her head to see where she was and what was around her. Her eyes went wide with surprise, and her heart skipped a beat. A crystal-clear lake opened up around her, shimmering in the sunlight and beckoning with its tranquility and beauty. The main character stood up and realized, this beautiful place could be where it all ends. Inez stepped into the water slowly, feeling the coolness against her skin. Lady Hyraxia always said, grasp too hard and you'll end up with nothing. That's what drove her, pushing her deeper and deeper into the lake, like she was searching for solace in its depths. Before going under, Inez looked up at the sky with a relieved smile. Then, the ground disappeared beneath her feet, and she was completely submerged. Air was cut off instantly. Inez instinctively grabbed her throat, panicked and terrified of the unknown. Looking around, the woman caught herself thinking, "What the hell am I doing right now?" Her lungs were burning harder and harder. Each second felt like an eternity in this airless shock and horror. Did Inez really endure 10 years in that hellhole, only to die like this, so pointlessly, the moment she gets free? If someone reaches out and offers you 10 steps to salvation, give them everything you've got. The goddess was dead wrong about that. Because even if Inez is ready to give up everything, no one's gonna lend her a hand. The main character's body was totally giving out, and she stopped fighting, sinking deeper and deeper. Suddenly, someone's hand grabbed hers, hard. And then, with all their might, they yanked Inez towards them. In the blink of an eye, her savior's lips were locked on hers, giving her a chance to breathe. The main character's eyes flew wide open in shock. As soon as Inez broke the surface, the goddess's voice echoed in her head again. If someone reaches out and offers to go the distance with you, give them everything you've got. That voice in her head, always asking where she'll go next, just wouldn't leave her alone, like a shadow dogging her every step. No matter how much Inez begged, it wouldn't stop, and the impenetrable darkness just crushed her mind, plunging her into an abyss of fear. Until suddenly, a man's voice called her name, like a ray of light in the utter black. He was like salvation, a light at the end of the tunnel, asking her to come to him. This man called to her, and Inez reached out, feeling the warmth of his voice envelop her like a soft blanket. Only he can pull her out of this nightmare, the only one who can understand her. Slowly, the woman opened her eyes, hearing someone calling her name. The voice grew louder, and finally, Inez saw who had been trying to reach her. The dark-haired man noticed she was awake, so he immediately asked what kind of nightmares she was having. Inez didn't expect to see Carson here. Sitting up in bed, the woman insisted she was fine, even though she felt anything but. Lord Rasonia, who also happens to be the Empire's 8th prince, asked me to thank the servants who've been taking care of her all week. This is the guy who saved the main character's life, by the way. Inez assured him she was doing all right. Ever since he saved her, the episodes had gotten milder. Back in Romfield, Inez had nightmares filled with endless darkness and the anxieties that haunted her day in and day out. But with Carson, the darkness was scattered by the light. The guy said that, even though they were weaker, the episodes still bothered her and stirred up a feeling of unease inside. In that case, Carson decided to ask something. Why, a week ago, had Inez decided to throw herself into the lake? The main character could hear that voice in her head again, the one that claimed all those people had died because of her. She was supposed to fall into the lake and kick the bucket, to free herself from the burden of guilt and the fear of living. The main character's body started shaking, and the noise in her head grew louder and more unbearable every second. Barely audible, Inez whispered that if someone like her were gone, then everything would sort itself out. But suddenly, Carson said that if it was too hard for her, Inez didn't have to say anything at all. He didn't want to put her through the ringer and just blurted something out. He genuinely cared about her well-being and peace of mind. There's no point in beating yourself up. It only makes things worse and causes more pain. Inez cried and asked, her voice full of doubt, how she could possibly live with herself if everyone died because of her. To which Carson replied, even if that's the case, it's better to just move on and not dwell on the past. The main character couldn't understand how he could be so sure. The man replied that this is life. Sometimes you just have to move forward, and it's up to Inez to decide what it will be. For half her life, the main character had only heard people telling her they wished she was dead. In the courtroom, everyone was piling on, acting like she was responsible for every bad thing that ever happened and didn't deserve a break. In prison, they were constantly roughing her up, saying she was a piece of garbage who deserved everything she got. So now, Inez had a hard time believing she wasn't just meant to kick the bucket. Could it be that she actually wanted to live, even after all the crap she'd been through over the years? Realizing this, a faint, weary smile touched the main character's lips. A few days later, it was pouring rain, but Inez still decided to visit the cemetery to pay her respects to her husband. Her shoes and clothes were soaked through, but that didn't stop her from doing what she came to do. Soon enough, the main character managed to find the right grave among all the others. After 10 years, she couldn't even cry, even though her heart was full of sadness and wounds that just wouldn't heal. The headstone read, Joseph Benoit, and underneath, Here lies the hurt he carried in his eyes in his final moments. Everyone kept saying Inez offed her husband, which made her start feeling weird, like maybe she actually did it. But now, all our girl wanted was to ditch those gnawing thoughts that were messing with her head and her life. Inez was going to be done with Joseph for her own sake, to shake off the weight of the past and start fresh. She slipped off her wedding ring and left it on her dead husband's grave, like a final goodbye to what was. Right then and there, memories of the good times, when they were together and totally in love, started flooding her brain. Inez remembered Joseph getting down on one knee with that very ring, asking her to be his wife. She apologized to her husband because she wasn't planning on coming back to this graveyard anymore. From now on, she wanted to ditch the past so she could live happily and enjoy every new day. Inez needed to get back to the village now, before the weather got even worse. The heavy rain had cleared the streets, and all you could hear was the sound of the drops in the gloom. But then, out of nowhere, the main character spotted a guy's silhouette up ahead. Inez froze, totally stunned, and just stared at this dude. Is she seeing things? 'Cause that looks like Joseph standing right there. But no way, the guy's dead. She thought hoping he'd come back was just a crazy pipe dream. The guy glanced back a little when Inez called out, asking him to hold up for a sec. Suddenly, he bolted, even though a second ago, they totally locked eyes. This ain't no hallucination, and it's not just someone who looks like him. Her heart's pounding like crazy with excitement and the hope of seeing him again. Even after 12 years, Inez couldn't mistake him. Every move, every gesture, she knew them like the back of her hand. So, the main character took off after him, dodging everything in her way, hoping for a miracle. She was sure of it. That guy had to be Joseph. Just like she figured, the moment Inez caught up to the guy, he smiled and said her name. Our girl, deciding to get a closer look, asked him if he was really alive and not some kind of ghost. She just couldn't wrap her head around why Joseph was only showing up now, after all this time. A wide, creepy smile spread across the blonde guy's face. She froze, totally confused by that smile of his. Just then, they heard the sound of horse hooves pounding nearby. Before she could even react, the mare reared up right in front of her. Time seemed to slow down, but Inez couldn't do a thing. She just watched it all unfold in horror. Her frail body hit the ground hard, and the world around her started to blur. Blood began to slowly spread out, painting the cobblestones red. Inez stared at Joseph, completely lost as to what the hell was going on. Even though it hurt like crazy, the main character still reached out to her beloved, hoping for some support. Out of nowhere, Joseph coldly called her a stubborn fool, and his words cut through her heart like a knife. He was bummed Inez didn't kick the bucket the first time, and that revelation wounded her even deeper. The blonde praised the coachman, handing him a whole sack of coins for a job well done. Then he walked up to the main character and said, annoyed, that he even became undead just to send her to Romfield. But who knew Inez would get sprung from that hellhole so soon? The main character listened to all this, not believing her ears, like she was trapped in some kind of nightmare. Joseph sneered, suggesting she get revenge for the injustice if she could actually manage it herself. This was total nonsense. Inez couldn't figure out why this guy tossed her into that living hell. You telling me he never even really loved her? Inez thought things were finally going to be okay, but I guess she was destined for a bad ending. But our girl wasn't about to go out like that. She wanted a shot at a happy life, no Joseph involved. Blinding light hit Inez, and her eyes snapped open. Next thing she knew, she was back in her old bedroom, in her bed. The main character was totally confused. Like, how the heck did she get here? Inez was dead certain she'd been run over by a carriage. Standing next to her bed was her mom, looking worried sick. Okay, now it made sense. It was just a dream, but so real. Inez couldn't believe it wasn't actually happening. Her mom wiped her forehead, all gentle, but then got stern, asking where she'd been out in that downpour. This was Inez's first time seeing her mom in 10 long years, and every second was filling her heart with tenderness and longing. Our girl reached out and touched her hand, begging for forgiveness, and couldn't hold back the tears of joy. Doesn't look like her fever's breaking, so Mom decided to grab more water, telling her daughter to stop crying. Inez shot right up in bed. She didn't want her mom to leave her alone. More than anything, our main character wished this dream would never end. Getting to her feet, Inez froze instantly. For some reason, her ankle felt totally fine, and that blew her mind. Ever since she started limping, Even in her dreams, it always hurt. So what was happening now was super weird and confusing. Inez desperately begged her mother to stop and not leave her alone, but she cut herself off short, seeing her reflection in the mirror. The main character's legs buckled instantly, and Inez collapsed to the floor, staring in horror at her reflection. Her mother rushed to her side, anxiously asking if she was all right and why she'd jumped out of bed in the first place. Inez realized with a jolt that she looked 20 again, and it all felt way too real. "Mom's alive, her face is young, and my ankle's fine. This can only mean one thing: I've gone back in time." The main character decided to ask her mother how old she was this year. The woman replied, confused, that she was 39, not understanding why Inez was asking with such intensity. "So that makes the main character 20 right now, and this isn't a dream. She's traveled 12 years into the past." Sitting at the table, Joseph remarked that the lady wasn't quite herself today. This guy's a commoner who became a knight through sheer skill and earned the respect of the nobility. Too bad the poor sap got offed by his wife a year after they tied the knot. But the truth is, this is the guy who stabbed our heroine in the back. That rainy night, he had this crazy grin on his face. But now Joseph's all shy, looking at her with puppy dog eyes. Inez just smiled and said it wasn't like that at all. The guy got all flustered and timidly asked her not to lie. His face lit up with a happy smile the second Inez said she'd been looking forward to seeing him all day. Joseph politely asked if she could spare him some time on her upcoming birthday. Our girl remembered that on her 20th birthday, this guy proposed, and that's when all this crap started. Inez nodded and promised she'd try to make some time for him. The guy thanked her and said he'd better get going, since he had some stuff to take care of. Our heroine knew it. Joseph would take a couple of steps, turn around, and start talking with that same fake sincerity. And just like that, the guy dropped a bomb he'd been holding on to. He'd become a knight in service to a major noble family. Inez jumped up that time and ran over to Joseph, totally stoked for him and proud of what he'd pulled off. She couldn't hold back how hyped she was. But now, she just gave him a polite congrats and told him to get a move on with his errands. A little breeze kicked up, carrying Joseph's question to Inez. Wasn't she even going to ask which family he was knighted by? The main character told him he was already a knight, and which family didn't really matter. Either way, it was a good, respectable job. Truth was, Inez knew Joseph had become a knight for Count Raymond's family from Razonia. That family wasn't exactly known for being friendly to commoners, so she was trying to figure out how Joseph even got in. Thinking about it, it was super weird, because guys like him don't usually catch a break like that. Out of nowhere, the guy just straight up asked what she was thinking about, his voice all pushy and demanding. The heroine smiled, assuring the guy she wasn't thinking anything like that, and told him to get to his business. Joseph didn't get why Inez was trying to brush him off all day. The young woman explained she had a ton on her mind about her upcoming birthday. The guy bought it and turned away from her, his friendly mask instantly dropping, replaced by annoyance. The heroine was barely holding it together, trying not to unleash all her rage on this dude. She wanted to end him right then and there for all the pain and betrayal he'd put her through. Inez's eyes blazed with fury. The demon inside her was thirsty to make him pay. But the heroine knew going that route would be a dumb move. This time, she decided to break Joseph herself, make him beg for it, and finally see what he'd done. Carson bowed before His Majesty and announced it was time for him to leave the royal family. The Emperor was taken aback by his son's bold decision. Landhill's been needing an heir for ages, so Carson stepping up as their lord would be a solid move. Catching the Empress's eye, the hero nodded in agreement. The Emperor also gave Carson the green light to bring his little sister back from Rasonia. The prince thanked His Majesty for this kindness. Before leaving, Carson, with a sly grin, wished the Kain's Empire enlightenment and prosperity in the years to come. The dark-haired guy was pissed that the Empress was still using the Emperor like her personal messenger. All those words were the Empress talking through him. The guy doesn't even know how his kids are doing, and it's been 5 years since they took his sister. Carson knew he was a fool for thinking he knew Louis, but he was still hoping for the best. That girl probably doesn't even remember them anymore. Meanwhile, our main character was having dinner with her parents, soaking up the warm, cozy family vibes. She still couldn't believe she was back in time and could see her folks again. Her mom noticed her daughter staring. She asked her husband if he thought Inez was acting a little weird, like the kid who used to chatter all day had suddenly gone quiet. The man told her not to worry, explaining that their daughter was just getting older and calmer, which was totally normal for her age. Agreeing with her dad, Inez said she was the same as always, even though inside she was a total mess of conflicting feelings. Our girl tried to force a smile to back up her words and put her parents' minds at ease. Her dad decided to ask his daughter if she'd heard the latest buzz. A new lord's coming to Landhill, and it sounds like things are about to get shaken up. Originally, Swindon was just a small territory on the edge of Rissonia, but after the flood, the one that hit 35 years ago, the waterway split the territory, giving Swindon back to Landhill. Even so, Rissonia's been quietly helping their territories all this time, keeping the region's economy and stability afloat. The Ines family still does business with them, but since they're part of Landhill now, we gotta tread carefully. The girl froze the moment her father mentioned this lord was the 8th prince, called Carson von Raymond. Our girl was surprised. She had no idea Carson had become a lord. Inez learned the new lord would be visiting in about 3 days. That bummed her out a little, even though she knew she wouldn't get to meet her savior at the birthday party. Mom said he's stopping by Rissonia to escort the princess living in Rissonia Castle to Landhill. Turns out the Lord of Rissonia is tutoring the princess. A chill went down her spine as she remembered a conversation she had in prison with that girl with the crazy eyes. Lena kept saying that if she killed that girl, he'd spare her as Joseph. Inez was totally lost at that moment, not understanding what this girl was even talking about, until, with a crazy grin, she screamed that she'd offed a member of the royal family. That's why Lena ended up behind bars. Now, the main character couldn't figure out why she was suddenly thinking about Lena. Could it be that the royal family member Lena was talking about was the 8th Prince Carson von Raymond's sister? Of course, you can't trust everything she said, since Lena was out of her mind back then and dealing with some serious mental issues. But if she was telling the truth about that messed-up incident, Carson's little sister met a tragic end in the last timeline. Sitting in her room, mulling over all these weird coincidences, Inez heard a knock on the door and someone asking if they could come in. A maid came in and announced that a letter had arrived for the young lady from Sir Joseph. The dude was congratulating his precious Inez on finally hitting the big 2-0. Joseph was hoping the lady would agree to meet him today. Susan jumped when her mistress called her name. Her voice was so tight. With a sly smile, Inez wondered if Joseph wasn't getting a little too big for his britches. Doesn't the guy have any manners? Especially when he's talking to a high-born lady from a noble family? The main character was pissed that some commoner knight dared to call her by her first name and break all the rules. Not only did he set her up and send her to Romfield, where she went through absolute hell, but then he offed her the second she crawled out of that nightmare. And then he laughed, watching her die, getting off on her pain and humiliation in that horrible moment. Clutching the letter, the main character vowed to herself that she'd make him pay for every ounce of suffering and shame. If this guy kicks the bucket, she'll finally be able to live her own life. First off, Inez had her most trusted maid send word that she agreed to meet with Joseph. The main character knew damn well that this guy's death wouldn't be the end of it all, or save her from the fallout of his actions. I mean, getting that many people to lie under oath in court? That's not something some random knight could pull off. There's definitely someone powerful backing him. If Inez avoids Joseph, he'll try other ways to get to her. The main character decided she was going to find out who's behind all this, no matter what. And then she's going to make them pay for every single bit of grief and suffering they put her through. You can't build a perfect world by just rolling over, and she wasn't about to stand by and do nothing. The main character got lost in thought, trying to figure out what a perfect world meant to her. She remembered Carson von Raymond, the man who saved her from certain death. He was the only one who offered a helping hand in a life that felt like pure hell when she had no hope left. Just his being around brought Inez closer to a perfect world, full of light and hope for a better future. A little while later, the main character greeted Joseph with a small smile on her face. The man smiled gently and confessed to Inez that he had genuinely missed her during all those long days apart. The lady replied that she felt the same way, and they were lucky the rain had just stopped. Reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket, the knight told Milady with a smile that he had written her a letter especially. Joseph cleared his throat so his voice would sound confident and wouldn't tremble with excitement when he was about to say something important. A teasing smile appeared on Inez's face as she suggested that he recite his cherished words. The knight nodded eagerly and said that he wanted to convey all his deep and sincere feelings for her through this letter. The main character remembered every line that Joseph was about to say to her perfectly, because they had once been precious to her. He asked her to remember the day they first met, when her golden hair seemed to glow in the moonlight. The look in her green eyes, so full of tenderness and mystery, took Joseph's breath away, and he froze for a second. From that moment on, he loved her with all his heart. Actually, she read this letter every single day, so she knew it by heart, believing every word was sincere. After finishing the letter, Joseph turned to the beautiful and noble Lady Ina Swendon once more. Then, he knelt before her, ring in hand, and offered her his hand in marriage. The main character stood up and reached for the box. But then she slammed it shut and told Joseph to stand up. The knight was confused. Was this a rejection of his feelings and his proposal? But Inez replied with a hint of sadness in her voice, that it wasn't like that at all. The young woman explained that she'd already received a marriage proposal today from another noble family with serious connections. Her parents got a wedding offer from a family that could guarantee her a stable future and security. Taking Joseph's hand, Inez gently asked him not to get too worked up about this, because she was planning on turning them down. But that'll take time, because even Joseph knows her dad won't give us his blessing without a damn good reason. The guy asked, with worry in his voice, how long he'd have to wait for the moment they could finally be together. Inez coldly replied that there was no definite answer, since who knows how long it'll take for her mom and dad to accept their love. But since Joseph's now part of the Count's family, he's got to really impress her parents, so her dad approves of their relationship. But the guy didn't get how he could prove himself in peacetime, when there isn't even a war to show his valor. Inez sadly asked him if he was really gonna let her live as the wife of some commoner, with no status or respect in society. If Joseph really wants to marry her, he's got to step up and prove he's serious. The main character knew damn well that to get things moving, she had to put the screws to him. Someone's pulling Joseph's strings, and it's stopping him from doing what he really wants, forcing him to dance to their tune. And this someone took a nobody commoner and turned him into a knight of a Count's family, capable of getting a title and perks. Then, this same someone leaned on the court, which led to her getting framed for her husband's murder. When Inez's family fell apart because of those bogus charges, this person was right there to cash in. She asked Joseph why he wasn't saying anything, if all that love talk was just a load of bull. If that's the case, she couldn't accept his proposal, because that'd be a total betrayal of her own heart. Inez knew in her gut that the only one who could be behind this was Count Graham, the guy Joseph's working for now. The knight grabbed her hand, not wanting to let go, trying to keep her there with him, and then he exclaimed, all worked up, that it wasn't what she thought at all, and that his feelings for her were genuine and true. Inez shifted her gaze to the hand that this jerk was now holding. Then, yanking it away and clutching it to her chest, the girl asked if the man truly loved her, or if it was all just a game to him. The heroine promised that this time she'd try to put off the marriage talk for as long as possible, but if more proposals came in, she wouldn't have a choice. Inez took the ring and said she'd hold on to it for now, if the man was okay with that. When things finally settle down, this ring will be a symbol of victory for the main character. Inez suggested ending the conversation for today. The gardener would be here soon, so it was time for them to split. But before leaving, the girl decided to ask Joseph if he honestly considered himself a man of humble origins and no better than anyone else. The man visibly tensed, and his gaze turned icy for a moment. Silence hung in the air. Joseph didn't understand what the lady was talking about or how he should react to her words. Their eyes locked, and you could cut the tension with a knife. Without a word, the main character just smiled and nodded goodbye. The second she turned her back and headed towards the manor, her smile vanished and her eyes turned ice cold. Joseph's face went completely hard as he watched her walk away. After a bit, the main character told Susan to hurry up, because Prince Carson would be arriving at the main square any minute. The maid, all worked up, asked her mistress how she knew about this secret passage. Inez just smiled and said she'd been here before. Suddenly, she remembered chipping away at stones here when she was locked up, dreaming of freedom. The main character added with a warm smile that it was a lifetime ago. Susan confessed to her mistress that she was actually a little surprised by her ladyship's actions today. She didn't expect the young lady to want to go see Prince Carson. Inez figured the maid thought she was some kind of simpleton, only interested in that commoner Joseph. Susan's surprise was understandable. considering how head over heels Inez was in her past life. Joseph popped the question to the main character 3 days ago. He hasn't contacted her since, so Inez started worrying about what he's cooking up again. But right now, seeing Carson is the priority. He's probably 21 now, and the main character's curious about what he looks like these days. Meanwhile, several horse-drawn wagons, loaded with goods and supplies, were approaching the city. Leading them on horseback was the Empire's 8th prince. Carson was stoked he could finally pick up Louis, his beloved sister, who he'd been waiting for so long. Thing is, the guy was pissed that this was taking way longer than he expected. When our hero turned 15, his mom kicked the bucket, leaving him with a ton of weight on his shoulders. She died from poison that had been building up in her system, something nobody dared to whisper about. Everyone in the royal family knew who was behind it, but they all played dumb, pretending they didn't see a thing. The fact that Carson had to keep quiet about his mom's death just kept reminding him how helpless he was. But when the kid turned 17, something else went down. Carson, finding out his sister was leaving for school, ran up to the carriage and demanded Count Graham stop right now. The little sis turned around, seeing her brother's worried face, which showed just how anxious he was about her future. The Count yanked her arm and told the princess they didn't have time for this. They had important stuff to do. Hearing that, Lena burst into tears and tried to reason with the guy, hoping he'd show some understanding and kindness. But Count Graham said with disappointment, he thought the princess was as sharp as Prince Carson. The little one pursed her lips and went silent. Carson stepped in front of his sister and angrily told the Count not to dare treat his beloved sister that way. He promised that if the Count so much as laid a finger on Louisiana, he wouldn't let it slide and would get what's coming to him. Count Graham had no idea why the prince would even think that way. After all, it was Her Majesty, filled with boundless parental love and concern for the family's future, who personally requested the princess's education. But maybe the prince is talking like this because the Count is related to the Empress, and therefore has his own agenda. It would be best if the prince didn't use such crude language, as it could damage his reputation. The Count suggested the princess hurry along if she wasn't planning on defying the Empress's orders. The aristocrat didn't understand how a snot-nosed kid like Carson could stop anyone, seeing as he was just a young prince. The Count gave the brother and sister a little time to say their goodbyes. Carson promised his sister he'd come back for her, no matter what. The princess held out her pinky and told her big brother to hurry, because the waiting was killing her. The prince linked his pinky with hers, sealing the promise. After Carson's only little sister was taken away, he started saving every penny, building his strength to get her back. Every dollar was earned fair and square, which helped the guy get his feet under him in society. The hero kept raking in the dough, and eventually he owned a mountain of cash, giving him even more leverage. So when Carson turned 21, he already had the power and pull he needed to make things happen. One day, the Empress found out the 8th prince wanted to become Lord Landhill, which totally blindsided her. Carson explained that the place was close to Rizonia. The guy was even offering to ditch the throne and pay up, which the Empress found pretty damn interesting. She wasn't seeing this as a bad deal for her. She stared Carson down, trying to figure out what he was playing at, but his face was a total blank. The Empress smiled and promised to pass the prince's request on to His Majesty. She was willing to give a little, seeing as Carson had been busting his ass this whole time. Getting the answer he wanted, Carson thanked the Empress and left the room feeling pretty good about things. The steady clip-clop of hooves snapped the prince out of his trip down memory lane. The knight informed His Highness they'd be arriving in Landhill real soon. That's pretty quick, considering we only had 4 days to get ready. Hearing that, a smile crept across Carson's face. What's 4 days compared to 4 years? The 8th prince shot back at the knight. Meanwhile, Inez asked Susan if a big crowd had gathered to see the 8th prince arrive. The maid confirmed her mistress's words, adding that he was the most famous of all the princes, and his handsome face only helped. So, the prince's popularity is no joke. Every girl's gotta have at least one picture of him. Inez asked the maid to get her one too. After all, if everyone else has one, she'd like a portrait as well. Something small, palm-sized. Susan, a little confused, agreed and promised to look for one at the market, since her mistress was so interested in the prince. Just then, someone around the corner yelled that it was a completely different situation. The main character stopped and quietly asked what all the commotion was about. Around the corner stood a blonde woman, talking to someone in a raised voice, clearly not wanting to hear anyone out. Inez recognized that girl instantly, and the words she'd thrown at her in prison. It was Lena, who in her past life had claimed she offed a royal family member to keep Jason safe. She's different from the Romfield psycho, sure, but that's definitely Lena, with her wild card personality and those intense eyes. The cloaked guy promised her it was a one-time deal. The blonde scoffed, annoyed, and started rambling about something. The main character froze, straining to hear their conversation, hoping to catch a key word. But the maid urged her lady to hurry, reminding her that time was ticking and the prince could show up any second. Inez had to agree, but she still couldn't figure out what Lena was doing in a place like this. That shady dude gave her bad vibes too, and Inez could feel something fishy going down right in front of her. Soon the girls reached the main square, packed with people all hyped to see the 8th prince in all his glory. Lena said in Romfield that she killed a member of the royal family in Rassonia, which means a murder is about to go down in this crowd. If she was talking about a princess from the royal family, that crazy woman was talking about Carson's little sister. Since the prince is picking up his sister in Landhill today, Lena's gonna ice the princess today. Inez clenched her fist, realizing the disaster that could be about to happen. I gotta tell someone ASAP to prevent a possible tragedy. But who's gonna believe me? And what if it's all for nothing? The main character was scared. She was afraid of screwing everything up again. Suddenly, some woman bumped Inez with her shoulder and rudely told her to let her through the crowd. Then, a girl walked past the main character. Her black hair caught Inez's attention, and the passing girl's golden eyes reminded the main character of Carson. Inez's eyes went wide with shock the second the woman called that girl a princess. The girl, in turn, gave the main character a shove, urgently telling her to hurry because time was running out. Inez couldn't believe her ears. Was this little kid really Carson's younger sister? The main character immediately reached out to her, sincerely pleading for her to listen. But the crowd erupted in cheers, and the main character's plea was totally lost in the noise. The girl tried to push her way through the people, but it was unbelievably difficult. Just as she reached the very front row, a knight stopped Inez, telling her the procession had already started and she couldn't get any closer. Right then, the main character spotted the prince and the knights escorting him. Carson's face was like a mask, like he wasn't feeling any of the crowd's joy as they cheered him on. Inez was totally lost, not knowing what to do in this situation because she had no idea when Lena might show up. But if the main character doesn't spill the beans ASAP, things are gonna go south real fast. Suddenly, the crowd went dead silent, then started whispering, wondering who the heck was on the other side of the square. The main character turned her head and spotted a horse with a rider, tearing towards them like a bat out of hell. A knight immediately ran up to the stranger and demanded to know who she was. The rider didn't say a word, so the knight yelled that he'd use force if she didn't stop right damn now. But the girl kept her mouth shut. Her confidence just cranked up the tension in the air around them. Her eyes were locked on the little princess. The stranger yanked back on the reins. The horse got the signal and bolted, charging toward the princess at breakneck speed. The knight didn't have time to react. The rider's hood flew off, revealing her face. Inez froze, seeing the furious look on Lena's face. The main character shifted her frightened gaze to the princess, realizing this crazed woman was charging straight for her. Her Highness, however, noticed nothing around her. Overjoyed at the prospect of seeing her older brother soon, Inez couldn't let this terrible thing happen, so she shoved the knight away and took off running. To change the future and save everyone from tragedy, she had to prevent this disaster at all costs. Time seemed to freeze in this critical moment. Every second counted and felt like an eternity. The main character turned and met Lena's angry gaze, who was burning through her with her hateful expression. Right in front of the horse, Inez grabbed Lena tight and tried to throw them both aside, to save the princess from certain death. There was a crash, and a little red ribbon, fallen from the princess's hair, slowly drifted down onto the stone tiles of the square. The main character slowly opened her eyes, still holding the princess close. Suddenly, a sharp, unbearable pain shot through her ankle, like a knife twisting in her flesh. Inez winced, her face contorting as she fought back a groan, not wanting to scare the little princess. In a quiet voice, she asked the princess if she was okay. Louis stared, terrified, at the blood trickling down her savior's forehead, her eyes welling up with tears. Then she silently nodded, bringing a faint smile to Inez's face. The main character told her Highness not to worry, promising that everything would be all right now. The knights immediately grabbed Lena, who was screaming that they couldn't stop her. The heroine was furious. If it wasn't for that thing, she would have taken that girl out. Inez silently watched the crazed girl, while Louis's body trembled from the horror she'd just experienced. The blonde immediately covered the princess's ears, telling her not to listen because everything would be all right now. "We need to get the princess to the prince ASAP, so Inez volunteered to escort her. But right then, the main character felt a sudden dizzy spell wash over her, like a wave crashing on the shore. Everything started to blur, and she began to lose her bearings. It'd be bad news if she just suddenly passed out. But it's okay, because she was able to help Carson, since in her past life, that man saved her from certain doom. If it weren't for Carson, Inez would have just died, never knowing anything. He who reaches for the stars and craves power will end up with nothing." The words of the goddess Hyraxia kept spinning in the main character's head. Seeing the prince in front of her, Inez reached out her hand to him. Carson grabbed onto her, holding on tight. Then he yanked her towards him, stopping the young woman from hitting the ground. He checked her over, worry etched on his face, and asked if she was okay. The main character looked at him, surprised, and quietly said his name, like it was the only word she could manage. And then, completely drained from the ordeal, she passed out right there in his arms. A few days passed after that incident. Carson walked down the castle hallway, thinking about how this kind of thing only happened the moment he left the imperial palace. If it weren't for that brave woman, Louis would be dead. The guy saw the moment that lady hugged Louis and pushed them both aside, away from the horse and its powerful hooves. He yelled out loud at that exact moment and yanked back on his own horse's reins too. But the mercenaries blocking his path wouldn't let him move and stopped him from interfering. The eighth prince, filled with anger and confusion, demanded to know what they were doing and ordered them to get out of his way immediately. One of the mercenaries replied that they couldn't do that, as they were following strict orders. Carson clenched his jaw. His mind filled with rage and hatred, he cursed under his breath. The man knew perfectly well that the Empress wouldn't let him off so easily, because she had her own agenda. But the fact that she dared to touch Louis sent the hero into a fury, igniting a desire for revenge within him. The man quickly dealt with the opponents blocking his way. And then he turned to see how Louis was doing, his heart filled with anxiety and worry about her condition. At that very moment, he saw his younger sister, who, from all appearances, was safe and sound. The man headed towards them. His steps were quick and determined. He stared intently at the stranger, who'd saved his sister from certain doom. Carson didn't recognize her face. They were definitely meeting for the first time. But right now, this girl looked like she was about to collapse from exhaustion. Through half-closed eyelids, the stranger looked up at him. The main character's eyes widened in surprise, his heart pounding faster as he recognized both her fragility and strength. Carson caught himself thinking that this stranger was like a perfect being. Snapping out of his memories of the past, Carson opened the door to the room. Inside, the blonde girl was still lying unconscious. Getting closer to her, the man realized that she now seemed younger and more vulnerable. Right then, the atmosphere was completely different. Carson kept racking his brain, trying to figure out why this lady would sacrifice herself for Louis, risking her life for someone else's safety. The main character slowly opened her eyes and looked at the eighth prince. Carson smiled warmly, seeing that she was awake. The main character was stunned speechless. Her eyes widened and her heart started pounding. She immediately started looking around, trying to figure out where she was and what had happened to her before. The prince explained that this was Lord Landhill's castle, where she'd been rushed after she fainted. Inez thought she was a goner for sure this time, but Carson saved her again. Maybe that vision she had before she blacked out was real after all. The main character whispered softly, wondering if it had all really happened. Inez asked if the princess was okay, and Carson said yes. Louis had just been by, but the lady was still sleeping, getting her strength back. Hearing her highness was all right, the main character smiled warmly, a wave of relief and joy washing over her. Since everything was okay, Inez decided it was time to head back to the mansion, where her parents were waiting. But when she tried to stand up, her legs gave out, and she started to lose her balance. Carson caught her before she could fall, his strong arms supporting her in that shaky moment. He explained that she'd lost a lot of blood, and she shouldn't try to get up yet, or she'd get dizzy and weak. The healer said she'd be fine, but advised her not to overdo it for a while and to get some rest. Carson figured her ankle was killing her, but if she rested for a couple of days, she'd be walking around without any problems or pain. That bummed Inez out, but she agreed with what he said. Seeing her reaction, the prince's expression also turned sad, and he went silent, unsure how to cheer her up. He just couldn't figure out why he felt so awkward around her. Suddenly, the main character went ice cold and asked what was up with that woman riding the horse. Carson froze for a second, thrown off by the lady's sudden change in attitude. Then he told her that they weren't sure who that woman was yet, but she was being held in the castle. The main character went deep in thought when she heard that. She started racking her brain, remembering everything Lena had told her back in Romfield. If Lena's telling the truth, the guy behind this whole thing is Lord Rissonia, Earl Graham. It would be a major win for both Inez and Carson if they could prove this guy was behind an attack on a member of the royal family. A golden opportunity like this could change everything. We can't let it slip through our fingers. The main character asked if she could meet with this girl. Raising an eyebrow, the prince asked, confused, what she wanted to see her for. He couldn't understand her reason for wanting to meet with such a dangerous woman. Inez awkwardly replied that the girl looked familiar. The guy was skeptical, saying the criminal was locked up tight, but maybe she knew who she really was. The main character said she needed another look to be sure and clear things up. It got awkward because the 8th prince didn't say anything, didn't know how to react to her request. Carson didn't get why she'd want to meet the person who almost offed her. Her decision seemed super sus to him. The guy finally smiled, a little sarcastically, and said if she really wanted it, he'd definitely think about her request. A faint blush crept onto her cheeks, giving away her embarrassment. The guy wished her a speedy recovery, took a step back, and headed for the door. Before leaving, the prince stopped and told her he'd already explained the situation to Viscount Swindon, so she didn't have to worry. The guy also asked me to stay here until the girl's completely recovered, so she can get her strength and health back. The main girl plastered on a smile, wondering if she was being locked up here like Lena, in this castle. Just like that, a whole week flew by. Prince Carson was in his office, plowing through a huge stack of papers, lost in kingdom business and his own thoughts. That woman still hasn't confessed, despite the countless interrogations and attempts to get the truth about her plans. She keeps saying she was drugged out of her mind at the time and doesn't remember anything. She was totally out of it. They also tried to get something out of those mercenaries who attacked the prince. Their bodies were examined, but they couldn't ID them, which just makes this whole thing even more of a mystery. Carson sighed heavily, realizing that nothing in life comes easy, especially when it comes to the safety of the royal family. And Inez Svendon kept popping into the prince's head. Her image just wouldn't leave his thoughts. The guy made it his mission to find out who she was. Turns out, she's the only daughter of Viscount Swindon, and just a regular girl. The fact that she saved someone in that kind of mess is pretty wild. Plus, how chill she was about the pain. Carson's got mad respect for her grit. The 8th prince even started wondering if she's really just some ordinary young lady, or if there's something more to her. Right as he's thinking all this, the butler knocks and tells him Miss Swindon's here. The 8th prince tells him to send her in. Carson's getting that weird, uneasy feeling again. The blonde walks in and curtsies, greeting His Highness with all the proper respect and grace. His eyes immediately drop, checking out how her leg's doing after that injury. Inez's leg was still super swollen, even though the healer said it was just a minor thing and she'd be fine soon. The prince wondered if she could even walk right. Suddenly, the guy realized something. This weird feeling inside. It's because her soul and body are like out of sync. Our heroes headed over to the table to hash things out. Scraping back a chair, the 8th prince was all class, gesturing for the lady to sit, showing her respect and whatnot. Then, the guy asked how her ankle was doing, because he genuinely cared about her well-being. Inez said she was fine, but you could hear a little bit of exhaustion in her voice from everything that had gone down. So Carson decided to ask if anything else was bothering her. The main character said no, which made the 8th prince stoked. Inez asked if she could go home since she was feeling better, and the prince figured she was all healed up. The heroine can't breathe a word about Lena right now, or she'll never get to go back to her folks. Before leaving, the guy decided to properly thank our girl for her bravery and sacrifice. With that, Carson glanced at his assistant and told him to hand over the documents. The prince expressed his gratitude for saving his only little sister, adding that he was late with his thanks because of some unfinished business. Inez felt awkward and replied that she just did what she had to do, not expecting any reward. However, the Empire has to reward someone who saved a member of the royal family. The main character was given a list and asked to pick what she needed most, so she could get a worthy reward. The eighth prince told her to take her time reading through it, but Inez had already made a decision, and it was a total curveball for everyone in the room. She's angling for immunity, a free pass to dodge responsibility for, well, something. Carson was thrown for a loop. He figured she'd go for land and jewels, the usual play. Okay, so this lady's got more going on than meets the eye. Her game runs deep. The prince had to ask, what kind of mess is a noble lady planning to get into that requires this kind of protection? But for our girl, that was enough. Inez played it cool, just casually asking, what if she did happen to off somebody someday? This noblewoman's words caught him off guard. That kind of blunt talk just wasn't done in their circles. Then he grinned and told her that was a pretty wild answer. He was curious what this dame could possibly do with those dainty little hands. Inez explained she wasn't planning anything, just saying you never know what tomorrow might bring. Like the lady said, you never know what the future holds, and Carson totally agreed, 'cause it's the truth. But this girl needs to understand that diplomatic immunity doesn't give her a free pass from the potential fallout of her actions. Inez knew that. She just didn't want to end up in Romfield. The prince was surprised, asking if she meant the prison near Rizonia, the one famous for its harsh rules and brutal guards. Her voice trembling, the main character said it was an unbearable place. At least that's what she heard from people who'd been there. The heroine just wanted the prince to promise that with her immunity, she wouldn't be sent to Romfield and her family wouldn't suffer. Carson thought about what she said, weighing all the possible consequences of his decision. Finally, he agreed and asked his assistant Noah to prepare the documents the young lady wanted to ensure her safety. Now that they were talking about the main character's family, she decided to say something to Lord Landhill to clarify their situation. Carson gave the young lady the go-ahead. Inez mentioned that the Swendon family was tied to Landhill, but they're still working under Rizonia's thumb, so she figured we needed to sort this out and get some clarity. The Lord didn't get what she was on about, seeing as Swendon's been part of Landhill for ages. Noah explained that compared to the size of their lands, Rizonia's population is pretty small, which causes extra headaches. So their lord often makes outrageous demands, putting the Swendon family in a real bind. Carson grumbled that families from his lands shouldn't be beholden to another lord. He said it'll take some time, since it needs the imperial family's okay, but he's on board to help. The lord promised to make sure Rizonia stops meddling in Swendon's affairs by the end of the year so they can finally grow. The heroine smiled sincerely and thanked him for his support and willingness to help her family out. Seeing her reaction, a warm smile spread across Carson's face too. Out of nowhere, the main character asks about that whole situation. She's talking about that woman locked up in the dungeon right now. Carson remembered she wanted to meet her, and it hit him hard. She wasn't kidding, she actually knows her. The prince just flat out asked if they knew each other, and Inez said she'd give him the full story right after their meeting. The guy decided to take her at her word and asked Noah to go with her, so she wouldn't feel so alone. The main character immediately perked up and was like, "Hold on, I don't need a babysitter, I can handle this myself." The girl didn't want to put anyone out, but Carson still insisted Noah go with her, since Inez was the one who'd done him a solid. So the main character was pretty much stuck with the prince's decision. But suddenly, Carson calls out to her, deciding to ask a question that's been eating him up inside. The main character stopped right at the exit and turned back, feeling like this question might be important. The guy's words had piqued her interest, so she waited impatiently to hear what he was going to ask. Out of the blue, the eighth prince wanted to know if they'd ever met before. Noah refused to comment on his master's question in any way, and just rolled his eyes. A smile played on the main character's lips, and then she replied that they had never met, even though her heart was pounding with excitement and memories of the past. Soon, the main character and the Lord's assistant descended into the dungeon, where the prison cells with the inmates were located. They approached the cell where Lena was currently being held. The cell door slowly began to open, gradually illuminating Inez's face. Inside was Lena Marie, sitting with her back to the guests, staring at the wall, lost in her thoughts. The criminal flinched when the main character called out her name, suddenly breaking her silence and solitude. She spun around instantly, trying to figure out who it was and what they wanted. Recognizing the pest who'd messed with her in the square, Lena jumped up and screamed that she'd ruined everything and destroyed her plans. Noah ordered the guards to tie up the prisoner first, so she couldn't move and wouldn't cause trouble during the conversation. Soon, Lena was sitting in front of the main character with her hands tied, a furious and hateful look on her face. The main character calmly explained that even if she kept quiet, she'd still be judged and likely sent to Romfield. Lena sneered with contempt, asking sarcastically if the lady really thought it was that simple. Those words made the main character smirk back. She asked the prisoner with a hint of sarcasm if she really thought whoever was backing her would help her avoid trial. He has no reason to keep alive someone whose plan completely failed. On the contrary, her death would be an advantage for him in this game. The main character went silent the second Lena spat in her face, fueled by pure rage and desperation. Noah jumped, instantly asking the lady if she was all right. Inez wiped the spit off her cheek and said she was fine, but the Lord's assistant suggested they call it a day and head back. But the girl refused, asking them to fetch her shawl, which she'd accidentally left in the room. Noah agreed and went to relay the request to the knights guarding the entrance. As soon as the girls were alone in the cell, the main character coldly called out to Lena, her voice firm and commanding. She told the prisoner she knew exactly whose orders she was following, making Lena flinch in surprise and fear. The criminal was horrified when the lady sadly revealed that Lord Rasonia had abandoned her, leaving her high and dry. The main character glanced at Noah, who was talking to the knights, and then continued, "I bet Earl Graham told you that if you did as you were told, you wouldn't have any problems. But it looks like the Count wasn't even thinking about rushing to her aid after the failure." Lena exclaimed that it just couldn't be, her voice trembling with indignation and shock at what she'd heard. Then the main character said the name Jason, and the prisoner immediately fell silent, staring at the young lady with alarm in her eyes. Inez informed the trembling blonde that Jason would soon die. Barely audible, Lena whispered that it was impossible, as if trying to convince herself otherwise and hide her fears. The main character didn't know who Jason was, but she was sure that this person was extremely important to Lena. After all, she even lost her mind because of his death in her past life. Inez repeated that Jason, whom Lena cherished so much, would surely die at the hands of the Count in the near future. The prisoner immediately jumped up and shouted that Inez was talking total nonsense. Hearing the screams, Noah and the knight immediately went silent and warily turned their heads towards the cell. They rushed in, all freaked out, asking what the hell happened. The main girl explained that this inmate just went ballistic on her, screaming threats. Noah immediately ordered a guard to haul the perp off the floor and get her conscious. A little smile crept onto the main girl's face as she felt the power shift, like she was in control of Lena. She took a step towards her, and Lena flinched, totally caught off guard and scared stiff. You could see the pure terror in the inmate's eyes. The main girl whispered, cold as ice, that Jason was a goner. Lena, desperate, told Inez to shut her mouth, but our girl just calmly said she needed to do that herself. Then she grabbed the inmate's chin and stared her right in the eyes, steady as can be, because she was about to tell her what Romfield really was. First, we'll start by giving Lena a manicure and pedicure she won't soon forget, complete with screams of pure agony. Then, that pretty little body of hers will be nothing but a collection of broken bones and bruises. Mark my words, the day will come when she'll be begging for the slop she once spat out. Lena's desperate voice just begged Inez to shut her trap. You could hear the panic and despair all mixed together. Hearing her called a total nutjob actually made the main character smirk. And then she just burst out laughing, couldn't hold it in anymore. Who would have thought she'd ever hear that coming from crazy Lena? But the girl wasn't wrong. Ever since Inez went back to being 20, she's been slowly losing it from all the rage and fear. With fake concern, the main character asked if the criminal was getting scared by her words and the promises she'd made. Tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, Inez told her not to worry so much, because she's gonna lose it too if she doesn't get her act together and change her fate right now. The knight returned, bringing the handkerchief Inez had asked for. The main character took it and thanked him for his trouble. Noah was just standing there, completely stunned. He had no idea what he'd just witnessed or how to even react. Before leaving, Inez told Lena to wake up and realize what kind of mess she was in and what was coming for her. If this girl keeps being stubborn and ignoring good advice, the consequences are going to be a total disaster. Everything she just heard will become reality if Lena doesn't change her behavior and how she deals with things. The main character begged Lena to team up with Prince Carson and tell him the truth, begging for mercy. It's the only way to save herself and her loved ones from certain doom and suffering down the line. Inez told the Lord's assistant that she'd said her piece, so she was heading out. Noah nodded, and the main character gracefully left the prison cell, feeling stronger after that conversation. As soon as there was a knock on the door, Carson allowed the visitor to enter, expecting important news. The door slowly opened, and Noah walked in, his face a mess of tension and uncertainty about the situation. He had absolutely no idea how he was going to explain everything that happened in the prison to Prince Carson. Tired of waiting for an explanation, Carson ordered his assistant to speak now and not waste any more time. Noah reported that Miss Svendon had returned to the mansion, and Lena Marie had agreed to tell everything. Hearing this, the prince raised an eyebrow in disbelief, not trusting his ears. He'd been working on that woman for a week, but Lena hadn't even breathed a word. Carson's expression immediately turned thoughtful. The peacekeeping force is still pushing hard to get Lena out of jail. If they get their hands on her, she'll be within the Empress's reach, and she'll figure everything out real quick. Looks like she's sweating that the mastermind behind all this will be exposed, and her whole scheme will fall apart. Carson begged Lena for ages, but the second she met Inez, the girl finally decided to spill the beans. The hero was totally thrown. He couldn't figure out how Inez knew all about Louis, Lena, and how to fix things. Back in the day, he'd have just chalked it up to fate. But now the prince wanted to know what those two were talking about. Noah said it was nothing much, except for one thing. Inez told the convict about Romfield. What if she keeps her mouth shut? She's definitely going to end up in that place. But Noah's told Lena that a bunch of times, trying to warn her. But for some reason, the prisoner reacted way more strongly than usual this time, and that was a red flag. The prince instantly remembered Inez saying she didn't want to go to Romfield. That's why she begged for immunity, even if she screwed up to avoid something truly awful. Carson couldn't figure out what Romfield had done to make her so scared of this place. Noah also mentioned the prisoner spat right in the lady's face, showing her rage and disgust. The noblewoman asked the knight to fetch a handkerchief, and once the girls were alone, Lena's whole attitude shifted. The Lord stood up and said he wasn't getting any of this and needed a full explanation. That's why he decided to head down to the dungeon, because he wanted to meet the prisoner face to face and figure out what she was really up to. Out of the blue, Noah said that Princess Louisanne personally escorted Lady Svendon all the way to her carriage. The little princess, who barely even leaves her room, decided to personally see this aristocrat off. The crazy part is, they just said hello, hugged, and parted ways without another word. Those words totally threw the 8th prince for a loop. Still, first things first, he decided to meet with Lena and get the truth. The Lord headed straight for the dungeon. Lena Marie was sitting in her cell, her whole body trembling with fear, because she knew her life was hanging by a thread. She was surprised to see the 8th prince paying her a visit, a guy whose reputation was shrouded in rumors and mystery. The convict shot to her feet and blurted out that she'd reveal who was behind her, her voice desperate and determined. Then she dropped to her knees and pleaded, saying she'd spill everything if only His Highness would save Jason. Carson asked, without a flicker of emotion, who she was talking about, his cold gaze betraying zero sympathy or interest. The woman explained that it was her 3-year-old son, and if the prince saved the kid, she'd testify and tell him everything she knew. Lena said that Count Graham had snatched him, so time was running out. Every second counted. Hearing that, Carson's lips curled into a smile. Of course, he knew it was someone close to the Empress, but that even Prince Graham had no clue? Unreal. Gotta thank him, though. Because of this screw-up, he can use the situation to his advantage and get what he wants. Carson can finally nail the Empress and make her look real bad in front of everyone. The prince promised the prisoner he'd find her son and asked where he was right now. But Lena didn't know the specifics, just that he was being hidden somewhere. And the kid looks like this: brown hair, blue eyes, and a little scar under his left ear. The prince told Noah to tell the knights to secretly investigate and find the boy ASAP. Carson decided to ask Lena Marie another question. The blonde flinched as soon as the conversation turned to the girl she'd met today. The guy was curious to know if the two women knew each other, but Lena just shook her head, said they met for the first time in the square. But it looked like Inez Svendon recognized her, and hearing that, Carson figured they were on the same page. The guy told the prisoner to hold on a sec while he found her kid, and Lena just started shouting thank yous. The girl promised she wouldn't forget Swendon's words. But then the prince suddenly stopped and coldly ordered everyone to forget the name of that Swendon woman. Headed back to his office, the prince called out to Noah. Then, he ordered them to start rumors that Lena Maria set the room on fire. But to keep the official stance quiet, avoid any extra questions, and tell the Public Safety Security Squad they can't release the body until the investigation's done. Gotta find a suitable female corpse. Gotta be burned up bad so no one can ID the face. And just like that, 4 days passed in the world. The assistant walked into his lord's office and reported with relief that they had managed to find Lena's son. Just as the lord requested, Noah spread a rumor about Lena's death, and one of Earl Graham's lackeys started acting suspicious and weird. Noticing the tension in the air, the assistant asked his lord how he planned to deal with Lena Maria now. For now, Carson decided to hide her, but Lena was a criminal who tried to off a member of the royal family, so she had to be punished. But for some reason, the prince thought he should ask Lady Innes for permission first. So Carson decided to put that issue on hold and ordered Noah to take the kid to Lena so she could see her son. They found the kid, so now Maria will testify in their favor, which could help them down the line. Noah decided to ask why Earl Graham had targeted his lord. Carson figured he was a threat to the Empress, since she was the one pulling Earl Graham's strings. But right now, the prince didn't have enough solid evidence to nail the Empress, and she wasn't going to stop trying to take him out anytime soon. So, looks like the guy's gonna have to hold his horses. He needs to prep just as flawlessly as the Empress. Carson sighed, saying it looked like he'd be swamped dealing with his own stuff and taking care of some issues with rivals. The assistant reminded him that the ball in His Highness's honor was coming up real soon. About a month left till the big event, and people are rolling in from all over the country, even overseas. The prince figured Inez would be at the ball too. She's one seriously weird girl. A noble lady who jumps in to save people like she's got nothing to lose. Talks about how she could take a guy out. With that delicate frame of hers, she flips people's opinions about her and what she can do in a heartbeat, making them second-guess everything they thought they knew. Bottom line, she's a real head-scratcher. Carson decided to ask Noah if sending Lady Swendon a dress for the ball would cause any complications. The aide said it'd be a fitting reward for rescuing the princess. But for some reason, Carson didn't like that word at all. It sounded way too simple and cliché. It'd be good to add some bling to the gift. So the prince also asked them to prepare a necklace for Inez. Before the aide left, Carson added that it had to be green. The prince wanted the reward to be green, but not too dark, so it looked refined and stylish. That surprised Noah. His lord seemed more intense than ever before. Even Carson was shocked that he'd suddenly started talking about the color green. He didn't know why, but when he thought about Inez, that color just popped into his head. A whole month went by, and finally, the long-awaited day of the ball arrived. Carson walked down the hall, listening intently to the report from his loyal aide. Noah said the Empress has forbidden Svendon from working with Rizonia and is ordering it back under Landhill's control. But the prince declared with confidence that from now on, Svendon will only work with Landhill, and nobody else. The aide pointed out that the territory issue is complicated and messy, so how did he resolve it so quickly? He hoped that his lord hadn't, persuaded the Empress to speed things up. Smirking, Carson replied that he simply mentioned receiving the gifts she sent to the city's central square. Since he brought up the, cleaners, the Empress will be hesitant to act for a while and will be more careful with her plans. That's why she approved this territorial dispute, to avoid any unnecessary trouble for now. Of course, she'll attack again in the future, but it's not like Carson hasn't prepared for that. Noah tried to bring up the ball gifts, but the prince asked if that was really important to discuss right now. We should finish with the greetings and pleasantries with the guests first. Carson opened the door and immediately stepped into a magnificent banquet hall, buzzing with people and a festive atmosphere. Every guest came up to greet him, and the prince responded to each with a smile and courtesy, showing off his good breeding. Not far from him stood Inez, arm in arm with her father, both looking dressed to the nines. The young prince had become the Lord of Landhill, so the Viscount couldn't wait to see what the future held for those lands. Her father noticed that his daughter looked a little off and somewhat tense, but Inez assured him that she was fine. But the truth was, she couldn't help but be nervous. because Joseph Benoit was due to arrive at the ceremony today. Days earlier, he'd sent the main character a letter, saying he wanted to hear her answer to his marriage proposal. The man would be attending the ball in Landhill, so he hoped they could talk then. The fact that a commoner would be at such an important ball, it almost sounded like a joke. There's only one way Joseph could have weaseled his way into this high society shindig. Count Graham strolled in, announcing loud enough for everyone to hear that the prince was just Lord Landhill, but throwing this extravagant party. An aristocrat's daughter smirked, saying Carson's practically royalty, so he's got to make a splash, right? Right after them, Joseph walks in, playing bodyguard to Lord Rasonia, which raised a few eyebrows among the blue bloods. Count Graham sauntered up to the lord, all smiles, and told him the ball was seriously impressive, a real spectacle. Carson just nodded, playing it cool, and said it was no big deal. Count Graham mentioned he brought his daughter along and suggested the 8th prince waltz with her. Before the aristocrat could finish, Carson cut him off with a slight smile, saying everything was fine. That made the Empress's lackey chuckle to himself. He asked the lord not to be so hard on him, seeing as he'd been looking after Louis like he was his own family all this time. Carson's eyes blazed with anger, his jaw muscles clenched, and he coldly asked who the Earl was so concerned about. The Empress's lackey immediately shut his mouth and glared at the prince, realizing he'd stepped in it. Then he cautiously asked if he and Her Highness the Princess weren't family. Carson coldly, and with bewilderment, asked if that's how Earl Graham treated his family these days. The aristocrat raised an eyebrow and asked in confusion what exactly the prince was talking about, clearly missing the hints. Except Earl Graham sent Carson's sister to him with only a single maid, which was pretty damn weird. A look of confusion flashed across the Empress's lackey's face as he realized the situation was spiraling out of control. He wanted to explain something, but fell silent as Carson thoughtfully added that the Earl seemed to be hoping for something bad to happen. Before, the prince would have just kept quiet, because Louis was in this guy's hands, but now everything had changed, and he couldn't stay silent. Now the atmosphere between the two aristocrats was tense, and you could cut it with a knife. A lot of the nobles noticed it, including the main girl and her dad, who were watching everything closely. Carson shifted his gaze when someone else started talking to him. Viscount Andrew Swindon and Inez greeted His Highness with a slight bow. The lord immediately smiled and held out his hand. After shaking the Viscount's hand, Carson said he'd been wanting to meet him for a while and get to know his family better. Andrew Swindon immediately sensed the nasty vibes coming from Earl Graham, who was watching their handshake with displeasure. Then, Carson thanked Miss Swindon again, because she'd helped solve a major problem. The main character's cheeks flushed slightly with embarrassment when she heard the prince's words of gratitude. She thanked the aristocrat for such generous gifts. Inez wondered if Lord Rasonia had personally picked out the dress and necklace, which highlighted her beauty so well. The guy nodded, adding quietly that these were gifts for his benefactor, and he couldn't trust anyone else with that. The main girl blushed and said that he must be super busy, with way more important stuff than picking out presents. But then, Carson leaned in close and whispered in her ear that green really brought out her eyes. Andrew Swindon watched his daughter talking to the 8th prince, looking pretty surprised. Suddenly, Carson announced that he had something to say to both of these fine folks. Since they were all gathered in such a lovely spot, it'd be a good time for a little chat, get some important business out of the way. Viscount Swindon got curious, and maybe a little nervous, about what exactly Carson wanted to tell them. Carson stated plainly and firmly that from now on, the Swindon family would be completely under Landhill's control. This sudden announcement totally blindsided the assembled nobles. The main girl looked pretty shocked too. The prince explained that after looking into it, even though Swindon fell under Landhill's jurisdiction, they're still tied to Rasonia. Earl Graham knew the territory shift happened 35 years ago, but now it seemed kind of fishy. It only happened because the landscape changed, right? If politics aren't involved, then everything should be cool. The Earl added that Swindon had been helping Rasonia for generations, but the prince cut him off. Carson coldly asked the aristocrat how he dared contradict the imperial family and question their word. He told the Earl not to sweat it, because Her Majesty the Empress signed off on these changes too. The aristocrat could send a letter to the palace right now if he didn't believe the prince and wanted to confirm things. But since this was an imperial family matter, the prince wasn't sure a regular earl could even make a dent. Now that Carson was the lord around here, he'd definitely sort everything out. The whole time, the main character and her dad were just watching this conversation, totally confused about what to do next. The Lord told Count Graham that if he had nothing else to say, he was free to leave and not linger any longer. Because the prince still had many people left to greet, Count Graham couldn't argue any further, so he decided to back down for now, even though the anger on his face was clear for everyone to see. Inez noticed that Joseph, who was passing by, turned around and looked intently at the eighth prince. Carson noticed it too, but didn't say anything. After a while, the prince went to rest in another room to regain some strength after socializing. But the aide reminded his master that he hadn't even greeted all the guests yet and hadn't fulfilled his duties. Noah added that the second part of the event, with dancing, would start very soon, and it was always the most anticipated by the public. The prince wanted to skip this part of the evening, but the aide replied that it could be damaging to his reputation. And then Noah held out a list with the names of the guests and young ladies so that Carson could familiarize himself with it before the dancing began. Carson didn't argue and scanned the document carefully. Then he asked Noah why it only had names and details about young women. Was he suggesting he pick a wife at the banquet? The assistant replied that it wasn't that simple. It's just nice to know something about the person you're dancing with at these events. But the prince coldly refused, crushing Noah's hopes that his bride selection plan might actually work. Carson didn't want to dance with anyone that night, let alone pick a bride from all the ladies present. But Noah insisted he shouldn't dismiss it so quickly, since the daughters of all the noble families of Landhill would be there. Each of these young ladies is different in terms of her family's status, reputation, dowry size, and of course, looks. So Noah did his best and wrote down all the worthy candidates, so the prince could pick the most suitable bride for himself from among them. With a heavy sigh, Carson called his assistant, resourceful. Noah scratched the back of his head and thanked him shyly for the compliment. The prince asked his aide to step out for a bit, said he needed some alone time to clear his head. Before leaving, Noah asked His Highness to take a look at the list while he was at it. Once he was alone, Carson got up and walked over to the window. Stepping out onto the terrace, the man let out a heavy sigh and gazed up at the star-filled sky. It's a little awkward playing the Lord all day, but it sure beats being in the prince's shoes. Then, the man glanced down at the list in his hand. He knew damn well that for a bachelor lord, the topic of marriage was unavoidable, and sooner or later he'd have to make a choice. Something caught his eye as he started going through the list again. For some reason, Inez's name wasn't on it, and that really threw him for a loop. The man looked up from the paper as soon as he noticed some movement below that caught his attention. It was Lady Swindon, sneaking into the woods under the cover of darkness, clearly trying to avoid prying eyes and ears. The look on her face was a little worried, which put the prince on edge. Carson had no clue where Inez could be going alone, especially this late at night. The prince's gaze sharpened as soon as he spotted someone else. This blonde dude he didn't recognize was following Lady Swindon, and Carson suddenly felt a knot of worry for her safety. Deeper in the woods, the main girl stopped. Once she was sure they were alone, and then she said they could finally talk in peace. Turning around, she saw Joseph, who was looking at her with a happy smile. The guy took a step forward and asked how Inez knew he'd been following her the whole time. The main girl replied that she just caught a whiff of his cologne. Joseph fumbled, trying to explain he was just keeping up with the trends, you know? Then he added he'd been thinking about it ever since he first saw her at the ball. Out of nowhere, Joseph pulls Inez close, gushing about how incredible she looks tonight. The guy confesses he's been dying to hold Inez all evening. But right then, all the main girl feels is filthy. Joseph backs off, asking Inez if she missed him, saying they've been apart for way too long. She immediately pulls away, telling him not to touch her, saying someone might see them. The guy apologizes, admitting he really wanted to meet up ASAP because he's got some good news. Inez raises an eyebrow, confused, asking what he's even talking about. Joseph takes a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves and gather his thoughts before this big conversation. And then he dropped the bomb that he'd gotten a baronetcy. Turns out, Earl Graham did him a solid and gave him the title he'd been dreaming of. Joseph was stoked because he snagged the title the lady wanted so bad, but Inez just scoffed. Not only did that guy knight Joseph, but he handed him a title too, which seemed totally unreal. The main girl was completely lost as to why, Stepping closer, Joseph announced that as soon as the title was official, he'd pop the question. He touched her cheek and added that their little rendezvous were over. Soon they could finally tie the knot, and that just filled his heart with joy. Inez still couldn't believe it. This guy joined the Earl's Night Squad and even got a baronet title. Nobody would object to a marriage like that. So like Joseph said, they could be husband and wife before long. Maybe that messed up future's gonna hit us sooner than we think. But Inez shut those thoughts down, figuring she needed to get a move on with her plan. Grinning, she said all sweet, "We haven't even gotten permission from our folks yet, so let's not get ahead of ourselves." Then she asked the guy if he wasn't supposed to be heading out, which totally confused him. Inez explained that a Night Protector can't leave his master's side for a single second. Nobles are super sensitive about that kind of thing, so she told him to hurry up and not hang around too long. Joseph nodded and said that in that case, he'd head out first to do his duty for the Count. And then he left, leaving Lady Swinton alone in the quiet night with her thoughts. She watched him go with a frown, totally aware of how complicated things were. All this time, Carson was standing behind a tree, watching the whole thing go down. He was dying to know what the hell happened. And it turns out it was just a lover's rendezvous. So the Lord finally figured out these two are actually head over heels for each other. The thing is, the vibes coming off them were totally different, which really threw him for a loop. Inez was walking down the hall, wondering what Graham got out of making a commoner a knight, then a baronet. Maybe he's got a beef with the Swindon family and wants to trash their reputation. Or maybe there's something else going on. She was trying to sort through her thoughts, but couldn't find an answer, which gave her a splitting headache. She decided to chill for a bit and get her head straight so she wouldn't lose her focus. But suddenly, she heard a familiar voice coming from a room, and her heart started pounding. Leaning against the door, Inez started eavesdropping, hoping to catch something important. On the other side of the door was Count Graham's daughter, but she wasn't alone. Joseph walked in and chuckled, noticing the lady was completely hammered. The aristocrat just slurred that he was too late. Then she told him to get over there and make it snappy. All this time, Joseph was hooking up with Graham's daughter, and the main character had no clue. The aristocrat wasted no time getting right down to business with the blonde. But now, Inez had a solid reason to turn him down. She couldn't be with someone who cheats so easily. Meanwhile, Joseph asked the lady what kind of booze she'd been knocking back. She snapped back that her father and the prince ruined her mood, so she ordered Joseph to focus on what mattered. The guy didn't hesitate and moved in on the lady, quick. Inez thought they were going to have some important conversation, but now realized she was better off getting out of there. Out of nowhere, someone clamped a hand over her mouth, and panic and fear for her safety surged inside her. Her whole body started trembling with terror, because she was completely alone in the hallway and had no idea what to do. But then, a familiar voice called her name, and she felt a small wave of relief wash over her. The man slowly took his hand off her lips, and she looked at him, totally surprised. Lord Carson was standing right behind her, and she instantly felt safe being near him. Inez wanted to ask him how he got there, but he put a finger to his lips, gesturing for her to be quiet. And then, leaning in close, he whispered in her ear that they couldn't make any noise right now, so they wouldn't raise suspicion. Breathing hard and looking around, Joseph suggested that they call it a night, so as not to push their luck, because he was worried someone might walk in on them. The noblewoman stepped away from him and said, with a hint of annoyance, that this wasn't exactly a barrel of laughs. She remembered Joseph had just met with Miss Swindon, and he confirmed it with a sigh. She was stoked because now the Swindons can't object to their marriage, but it does complicate things a bit. He looked at her, confused, and asked what the heck she was talking about. She reminded him that Lord Carson himself said the Swindon family isn't connected to Rizonia anymore. Because of that, her dad already bolted to the Imperial Palace to talk things over with the big shots and the Empress. She told Joseph to hurry up with the wedding, because if Prince Carson gets taken care of, everything will be smooth sailing. According to her father, the 8th prince has a nose for money, so he could screw up their plans. But no sweat, because Landhill's gonna merge with Rizonia before long anyway. She told Joseph to just hang tight, and then he can have all the fun he wants with that cute little thing. He smirked and asked if that wasn't exactly why. He was about to kick the bucket. The Earl of Graham's daughter smirked when she heard him say that. Then she pulled the blonde guy close and kissed him hard, forgetting all the worries and troubles around them. With a heavy sigh, Prince Carson asked Miss Svendon to step away so they could have some privacy. They went to a room where they sat down at a table to discuss what they'd just heard. Since the Svendon family had just been mentioned in that room, Carson asked the lady if she happened to know those two people. She'd never seen the woman before, but the man was a different story. She knew him pretty well. Clutching the hem of her dress, the main character confessed that he was her fiancé, and they were getting married soon. Seeing the lady's reaction, Carson asked if she was all right, and Inez nodded, saying she was fine. The prince nodded understandingly and said he had something important to tell her about recent events. Inez was surprised when he told her Lena Muriev had confessed to everything, because she'd heard the prisoner died in the fire. Carson confessed he started those rumors himself to throw everyone off, and now Lena and her son, Jason, are living in his mansion. The main character's mind flashed back to words she'd heard Lena say before. Now she realized that Jason, the name Lena had screamed so desperately, was actually her beloved son. The prince explained that Count Graham had taken the boy hostage to shut Lena up and force her to keep quiet. But Carson noticed that Miss Swindon wasn't all that surprised by what he'd said, like she already knew about it. He had no idea how the lady knew, but since she was helping him, she definitely wasn't on Graham's side. Inez didn't understand why Carson was hiding Lena from everyone, since she was proof that Graham was behind the attempt. But Carson didn't think that was enough to take serious action. He needed to catch a bigger fish. The prince was talking about the person behind Graham, her Imperial Majesty, who was also involved in this whole mess. Now the main character knew who Carson was really after, and realized this whole thing was way more complicated than she originally thought. Noah poked his head into the room and caught the master with Ms. Swendon, clearly deep in some serious discussion. He apologized for interrupting and explained that the man of the hour had been missing from the ball for too long, and the guests were waiting, which meant the Lord needed to get a move on so he could kick off the ball with the first dance and make a killer impression on everyone. Carson stood, knowing full well he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, and his duty was to fulfill his obligations to society. The main girl was taken aback when the guy suggested they go together. The Lord stood before Miss Swendon and gallantly offered his arm, inviting her to join him at the heart of the evening's festivities. He wanted Inez to allow him to escort her. The main girl was thrown for a loop, totally surprised by the man's offer. But she accepted his offer and gave him her hand. Feeling a thrill run through her, Carson kissed her hand with a flourish and asked her to do him the honor of sharing the first dance of the banquet with him. Inez blushed, flustered by the guy's actions and all the attention he was giving her. Then she stood up and took his hand, accepting his invitation with a happy, fluttery heart. And just like that, our two heroes headed to the banquet hall, ready to dive headfirst into the party atmosphere. Noah stopped dead in his tracks when the boss called out to him, saying there was a mistake in the list he'd been given and it needed fixing. The prince insisted that the Swendon family absolutely had to be added to it. The assistant raised an eyebrow, looking at his boss, totally confused, and then it clicked. He understood exactly what the Lord was implying. He immediately hurried after his boss, happily scribbling the request into his notepad. Maybe the boss would find a wife way faster than Noah thought, and that was definitely something to be happy about. Walking down the hallway, the main girl felt awkward, and her inner turmoil was building up. Carson felt the lady grip his elbow tighter, and that couldn't help but put him on edge, because she was clearly anxious. The girl wondered if everyone would stare at them the moment they walked through that door. The Lord chuckled and asked if Inez was getting nervous, because he thought the lady was calm in any situation, even the most stressful. The main character confessed that this was her first time at such a big ball, which was why she felt a little awkward right now. Unexpectedly, Carson replied that she had an amazingly sweet side too, which made her even more attractive. Inez timidly asked if the Lord was joking, because she hadn't often attended balls before and hadn't danced with anyone besides her father. The man froze as soon as the girl revealed that he was her first real partner. That threw him off, because hearing something like that was pretty unusual. Inez thought it sounded weird, since she was already 20, and this was practically the first time she'd danced with someone at a reception. Like everyone else, she debuted at 16 and danced with her father back then. She hadn't been to a shindig like this since, which made the whole thing a pretty big deal for her. The main character confessed that the reason was she'd genuinely had a thing for Joseph all this time. Back when she was 16, all she dreamed about was marrying some regular dude. Carson got it. After 4 years, Inez wouldn't just forget that guy, and for some reason, that got under his skin. The guy asked why the lady had changed her mind and shown up at the ball. The main character was about to answer, but then the doors swung open, and a bright light blinded her for a second, freezing her in place. The assembled guests were stoked to see the Lord had returned. The high society ladies perked right up, seeing the Lord walk into the hall with some fancy dame, making the other women green with envy. Carson and Inez stopped on the balcony and took in all the guests gathered in the grand hall. The heroes didn't really get a chance to talk today, so the Lord suggested they chat another time. The main character agreed, then lowered her gaze. She spotted 2 familiar faces in the crowd. The Earl of Graham's daughter and Joseph, standing right next to each other. The Earl of Graham's daughter and Joseph were standing close, glaring directly at Inez and Carson. The main character smirked instantly, wondering what Joseph thought of the situation. She doubted he saw her as some clueless girl anymore, someone easily flustered by his words. She had way more confidence now. As they walked down the stairs, Inez told Carson she wasn't much of a dancer, since she didn't have any experience, so she hoped she wouldn't step on his feet during their dance. Carson descended a few steps, stopping in front of Lady Swindon, forcing her to stop as well. Then, confidently, he said Inez could step on his feet as much as she wanted. He was ready for any mistakes she made. Those words moved Inez, and her heart started racing with excitement. Out of the blue, Carson asked the lady if she could swim, and she said no, totally confused why he was asking. The prince explained that he just had this feeling they were in the same boat, and she might fall out at any second, but not to worry too much, because he's always ready to lend a hand and be there for her when things get tough. The main character still didn't get what Carson was driving at with his swimming question. The guy pulled her in close, and with a kind smile, explained that he's a great swimmer. The music got louder, and our heroes twirled into a dance, soaking up the vibe of the ball. Even though our girl was a total newbie at dancing, following this guy felt completely natural. Carson looked at her with tenderness and smiled. He knew damn well that if Inez went to balls more often, she'd have guys lining up for her, because she was ridiculously gorgeous. His gaze shifted to a guy standing near the Earl of Graham's daughter, who clearly wasn't thrilled about their dance. Joseph was burning holes through them with his eyes, his jaw muscles clenched tight, a clear sign he was pissed. Carson glanced at his partner, asking if everything would really be all right after they finished the dance. Surprised by the sudden question, Inez asked, confused, what exactly he was talking about. But 4 years is a long time, so the 8th prince asked the lady if she didn't love that man anymore. The main character whispered, asking what he meant by, she loves him. However, the song ended, and she didn't get a chance to answer. The characters bowed to each other, showing their respect and gratitude for the dance. Inez steeled herself and told His Highness that things weren't at all what he might think. She, as she is now, doesn't love the person she cared for in the past at all. Those words made Carson freeze, staring in astonishment at Miss Swindon, whose face was beaming with a genuine smile. A smile crept onto his face too, finally feeling some relief wash over him after hearing her words. The Lord requested the musicians play an ode to the goddess of victory for their next song. The conductor immediately raised his baton, and the musicians began a new melody, filling the entire hall with gorgeous music. The prince offered Inez his hand, and she stared at it, bewildered, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The man smiled, guessing that the lady needed support today, not just empty platitudes. The main character knew all too well that this world was full of malice and the contempt people held for her. But Carson, just like before, was saving her once again. Inside his master's study, Noah voiced his opinion that the ball went much better than he'd anticipated. Suddenly, the Lord asked him to discreetly look into something. It concerned the financial situation of Viscount Swindon. Noah was taken aback, like, did the boss really want to know about the dowry already? Didn't expect him to be so eager. But Carson shot that down, said that wasn't it. The Lord remembered the Earl of Graham's daughter, who said he had a nose for money and that it could screw up their plan. According to the lady, even if Swindon went under Landhill's control, they'd still get swallowed up by Rosonia. If that girl was so cocky, then things must be going exactly as they should. The fact they're even eyeing Landhill means they definitely have big plans for Swindon. Carson had no doubt about it. That's why he wanted his assistant to dig up everything, find out every last detail, down to the number of candlesticks in the Swindons' mansion. Deep in the night, a carriage slowly rolled along a forest path. Inside, the main girl asked her maid, "What about her father?" Susan explained that Mr. Swindon had some urgent business to take care of, so he left ahead of them. The maid asked the mistress if she'd been dancing today, and Inez sheepishly admitted she had. Susan's eyes lit up immediately, and she blurted out, "What family's this young gentleman from?" But confusion washed over her face as soon as the mistress revealed it was a lord. Now Susan realized they were talking about the new Lord Carson. The maid was totally surprised, but the main character insisted she wasn't making it up. Susan gushed, "That scene of you two dancing must have been like something out of a dream." After coming back to life, Inez never imagined this would happen, so she warmly replied, "It feels like a dream to me too. Plus, the guy said they're in this together now, so the main character was glad she could finally get some help." Meanwhile, Susan excitedly added, "I've been busy too, and I finally found him." She explained, "I'm talking about the Lord's portrait, the one you asked for before. That was a real pain to pull off, but Susan promised to bring it over as soon as it arrives." Truth is, the main character was totally joking when she said that. But now, with a sweet smile, she announced that when she gets the portrait, she's going to put it in her Bible. Susan smiled, thinking about how adorable her mistress was. Out of nowhere, the maid asked if the lady dancing with the Lord meant she wasn't going to see Sir Joseph anymore. Backing that up, Susan immediately chimed in, saying she never thought that guy was right for her mistress to begin with. Now that Inez knew all the events of her past life were orchestrated by Graham, there's no reason to keep seeing Joseph. But if she dumps him now, the heroine doesn't know what kind of crazy scheme he'll pull in the future, which means she's got to keep seeing Joseph for now. Suddenly, the carriage started slamming on the brakes, almost sending the main character flying, but she managed to grab hold and stay put just in time. A guy walked up to the carriage and asked the young lady if she was all right. The door swung open, and Inez saw Joseph, who told her they still had some unfinished business. You could see a whole cocktail of emotions playing out on this guy's face. The blonde asked, annoyed, why he was showing up like this, but Joseph just wanted to talk again. The main character knew damn well she didn't have another choice right now. Susan jumped and started freaking out as soon as the lady stood up and said she'd be out for a sec, saying everything was cool. She stepped outside and stood in front of the blonde dude. Joseph couldn't wrap his head around how she could dance with the 8th prince at the ball right in front of her fiancé. The main character gave a BS explanation that she was stuck in that situation too, which just confused the hell out of the guy. Inez explained that the Lord had asked her to dance as thanks for her saving his little sister. That's exactly why she couldn't refuse a lord, especially a prince. Joseph roared. Carson's eyes on her were totally out of line. The heroine sighed, explaining that even if he's mad, he shouldn't talk about the Lord like that. Joseph shut his mouth, jaw tight. Then he slammed his fist into the carriage, trying to contain his boiling rage. He didn't get it. Did any of this even matter right now? The heroine frowned, studying Joseph intently. Then she told him to chill out, because the Lord's look, or whatever it was just his imagination. If her feelings for him haven't changed, then there's no problem. Joseph grabbed her hand, demanding she prove it. He wanted Inez to kiss him as a promise, so the water goddess could witness their love. Hearing that, the main character couldn't help but smile, and then she abruptly yanked her hand free from the man's grip. With a smirk on her face, the young woman asked if that was his way of testing her love. Joseph started to explain everything to Inez, addressing her as my lady, but caught himself and used her name. Taking a step forward, the main character reminded him that she is still my lady, meaning Joseph should protect her honor and reputation. But instead, he just shows up in the middle of the road and demands a kiss as proof of love. Joseph immediately started to explain, flustered, that that's not how it was at all. Then, he immediately dropped to one knee in front of the main character. The man explained that he was so worked up that he messed up, and now he's begging for forgiveness. Inez decided to accept his apology, but coldly added that Joseph better not disappoint her again. The blonde guy promised he'd remember that. The main character walked right past him, totally missing that her snow-white handkerchief had fallen. But Joseph spotted the fallen item right away. He jumped up and called out to the lady as she was leaving about it. As she stepped into the carriage, the main character told him to just toss the handkerchief since it was dirty and she didn't want to deal with it. And then the carriage took off, leaving Joseph's reminder that he was the one who gave her that handkerchief unheard. The main character was even a little surprised that this guy was so carefully holding on to something she'd so carelessly tossed aside. A smile crept across her face because she found the thought amusing. A few days passed after the ball at Lord Carson's mansion. Noah laid the report on the boss's desk, explaining it was the Swendon family's assets info he'd mentioned before. As you can see, they've got a huge wool biz, steady income for years. Overall, they're on par with your average Viscount families, which Carson had to agree with. The mountain range that marks the border between Rissonia and Swendon now belongs to the Swendons. Hearing that, the 8th prince's hands twitched. Then, a sly grin spread across the man's lips. Finally, he'd found what Graham craved so badly. Carson asked if the Swendon family would be at the upcoming hunting festival, and Noah immediately confirmed. Crossing his arms, the prince announced that, in that case, he'd have to do the questioning himself. The day of the competition arrived after the ball. Inez's father was swamped, dealing with a ton of important landhill issues. So, thanks to that, our girl came to the festival instead of her dad, and now she was searching for the Swindon spot. But suddenly, someone called out her name. Turning around, she saw the princess smiling right in front of her. Inez immediately bowed and greeted Her Highness. Louis took a few more steps towards the lady and said it had been a while, and our girl agreed. Her brother said Lady Swindon was coming to the hunting festival too, so she admitted she decided to come as well. Just then, a guy approached the princess. Seeing the man, she bowed again and greeted the lord. Carson gently touched his sister and asked Inez where Viscount Swindon was. She explained that her father stayed back at the mansion to handle some landhill business. Guess we're not getting any intel on that mountain range now. Carson just smiled and said, "What a shame." The princess took Ms. Swindon's hand and asked her to come back to their tent. Looks like Louis is really itching to spend some time with Inez, so Carson invited her to join them. The main character agreed and went along with the others. We've got some time before the horn blows, so Carson suggested they chill out for a bit. Inez was soaking up the warm sunlight and enjoying the occasional breeze. Plus, the guy sitting next to her made her feel totally safe. Everything was so peaceful, it almost felt unreal. No sooner had she thought that, when a woman walked into the tent, surprised, and said she didn't even know the Lord was here. The man replied to the Countess, "It's been a while, hasn't it?" She apologized for missing the banquet, and that's why she's here now, to introduce a member of her family. The main character's eyes widened as a familiar face walked in and greeted the Lord. The guy announced he'd recently been granted the title of baronet. Then he added that his name is Jamirin Winston. The main character's mind immediately flashed back to all the ways this guy tormented her in her past life. And now, her nightmare from the past was standing right in front of her. Jamirin smiled warmly and told the Lord he'd been wanting to meet him for ages. The Countess confessed that Sir Jamirin had been a real pest, so eager to meet His Highness, making the man blush with embarrassment. She added that the young gentleman is so sincere and pure, she even worries how he'll survive in this awful, cruel world. Hearing that, the main character clenched her fists, feeling a wave of anxiety and unease building up inside her. Then she just bolted up, sending her chair crashing to the floor with a loud bang, and everyone turned to stare. Inez was totally lost, trying to figure out what this guy was even doing here, her mind racing for answers. Jamirin's words echoed in her head, clear as day. The more she fought him, the more it excited him. Carson saw Miss Swindon's reaction, and worry flickered across his face. The main character was terrified. She thought she'd finally gotten away from this creep. She remembered Jamirin telling her he'd chase her to the ends of the earth, and that thought was eating her alive. His promise that she could never escape him kept replaying in her mind, filling her with dread. Jamirin asked her, all innocent, if she was okay. But Inez saw right through his mask to the arrogant jerk underneath. Panic started to rise inside her, and she had no idea how to deal with it in this messed-up situation. Just then, Carson stepped in front of her, shielding her from Jamirin with his broad back. Then, cool as you like, he says he can't give us his name right now. He ordered the lady to take that guy with her and get out of the tent, pronto. And wouldn't you know it, she obeyed without a peep. After that, Carson asked Noah to watch over Louis for a bit while he tried to calm down Miss Swindon. Plopping down on the bed, the main character did everything she could to stop the panic rising up and get her head straight. This Jamirin doesn't know her, so the young lady has no reason to be so scared of him. Carson grabbed Miss Swindon by the shoulders and asked, worried, if she was all right. The main character ripped open the top buttons of her shirt, revealing a little skin, and whispered that she was having trouble breathing. The eighth prince apologized for being so forward and helped her take off some of her outer clothes, trying to make her feel better. Finally getting her bearings, Inez thanked the Lord for his help and said she was okay now and feeling better. But Carson didn't buy it for a second, because her whole body was shaking. The guy went to call for a medic, but the main girl suddenly grabbed Carson's sleeve, stopping him. Then she started begging Carson not to leave, because she didn't want to be alone in the tent. The truth was, Inez was terrified that Jamarin would come looking for her and mess her up again. It was only then that the main character snapped out of it and let go of Carson's arm. In her head, she knew Jamarin couldn't really do anything to her, but her body wasn't listening. Carson held out a cup of water to the lady and told her to calm down first. The main girl thanked the Lord, then noticed his embarrassed, flushed face and felt a little ashamed. The guy mentioned that maybe she should tidy herself up a bit, hinting at her, revealing state. Inez immediately understood and started covering herself, apologizing to him and saying she just hadn't noticed. With an awkward smile, Carson said he'd turn around for a sec, give her a chance to pull herself together. The main character, a little flustered and embarrassed, got out of bed and said, a bit hesitantly, that she'd get dressed in a sec. But as soon as the young woman stood up, she lost her balance and started to fall, unable to catch herself. Carson, seeing this, immediately threw his mug of water aside. Then, without thinking, he reached for Inez, shouting her name loudly and urgently, trying to stop her from falling. The result of this crazy situation was that the main character fell back onto the bed, and the eighth prince ended up hovering over her. Carson told her that if she tried to stand up with legs as weak as hers, she was bound to fall. The main character explained, embarrassed, that she never thought she'd fall, and immediately apologized. Then the two of them got up and sat down next to each other. Suddenly, Inez noticed a big wet spot on the eighth prince's clothes and felt super awkward about it. She immediately tried to fix her mistake, dabbing at the stain and apologizing profusely for the whole thing. Stumbling over his words, Carson asked what she was up to. The main character pulled her hand away and explained, flustered, that her shirt was soaked and she was just trying to clean it. Embarrassed, the prince told her not to do anything else, or he'd totally lose it. Inez nodded, but to herself, she thought about how she always ended up in these ridiculous situations. She just didn't get why Carson was blushing so hard. The man stood up abruptly and said he'd get her some fresh clothes so she could be comfortable. Then he opened a chest next to the bed and started rummaging around for something. Approaching the lady, Carson held out a black shirt and explained it was the only spare he had, asking her to change into it. If Inez went outside wearing Carson's clothes, it would cause a total uproar among everyone gathered. The main character replied with a slight smile, saying it wouldn't be a big deal if she just threw a jacket on over it. The guy just gave her this doubtful look, like, yeah, but that ripped seam's gonna bug you anyway. Inez knew she was beat, so she just gratefully reached for the shirt. Carson immediately turned away, saying it'd be easier for her to change if he wasn't looking. Before long, she'd swapped clothes. Carson mused that the shirt was way too big, but he could fix it up a little to make it look better. As soon as he reached for the sleeve, Inez said she could do it herself, but Carson flat out refused. He wanted to do it for her, because she was always giving him a reason to worry. The eighth prince told her he needed her to listen up. Soon after he left, a horn would sound. Carson told Inez to count to 100 after she heard it before coming out. By then, all the guys would be out hunting, so Inez wouldn't have to worry about wandering eyes. Then the Lord took off, asking the young lady to hang tight for a bit. Just like Carson said, the hunting horn blared right after he left. The main character jumped and realized all the guys had gone hunting, except Jamarin wasn't in hunting gear, so maybe he didn't go with them, which meant the main character might run into him again. After counting to 100, like Carson asked, Inez slowly left his tent. Suddenly, the little princess called out to her. The kid looked bummed out. Inez figured Louis was super scared, but the girl explained she was just worried about her. The main character said she was doing great and thanked them for their concern. She suggested that Her Highness go see the rabbits together, and Louis happily agreed. The girls, along with a maid, headed to the spot. Way more ladies were wearing dresses than the main character expected. Suddenly, one girl caught the main character's eye. Her name was Charlotte, and she was holding a rabbit, smiling warmly. The main character was instantly thrown back to her days in prison. One day, Charlotte woke her up. She gave Inez some bread she'd stashed away and told her to eat it, but the main character knew it wasn't her share. The girl explained that it was okay. She'd heard from Casey that Inez hadn't been able to eat since yesterday because of Jamarin. The main character burst into tears, thanking Charlotte for caring about her. Honestly, Inez thought she'd never see her again. Snapping out of her memories, the main character walked over to Charlotte and said the rabbits were really cute. The aristocrat immediately stood up and gave our heroine a warm greeting. Inez introduced herself, and Charlotte Drapinwa did the same, explaining she wasn't from around here and hadn't recognized her. Her last name might sound weird, so Charlotte immediately explained that her husband was a foreigner. Inez realized they were talking about the guy who lived in Landhill for a while, and then, well, things didn't end well for him. Except Charlotte was the one who caused those things to happen, and that's why she ended up in Romfield. The main character asked how the lady ended up here. Charlotte explained that her husband works for the Razonian Railroad and got transferred here suddenly from Central HQ. But since he works for Razonia, Inez wondered aloud why they lived in Landhill. Charlotte asked if she'd mentioned living in Landhill, and the blonde stammered that, well, it's the Landhill Festival. The aristocrat agreed with Inez, then suggested they sit down and chat for a bit. The girls did as she asked, while the princess continued playing with the little bunnies. Charlotte confessed that she's actually expecting a baby. She feels fine in the mornings, but a little rough after lunch. Her husband is a key player in the railroad business, and since the Lord of Razonia wants to build a line through Landhill, they're stationed here. Once the railroad is built in Landhill, you'll be able to go practically anywhere. Right now, the only place you can take a train to from the capital is Sanskria, where you can see a magnificent temple. Charlotte loved riding trains because she thought they were pretty romantic. After chatting with the lady a little longer, Inez got up and said she had to go, since she couldn't leave the princess alone for too long. The main character asked Charlotte to invite her over sometime, since she grew up around here and could help out. The aristocrat happily replied that she was actually a little bored because she didn't have any friends. Inez said goodbye to the girl, and her face immediately turned sad as soon as she turned away. Charlotte might end up back in Romfield again this time, but the main character wanted to help her avoid that. The girl approached a maid and asked where Her Highness the Princess was. The caretaker pointed towards the forest and explained that she had just gone into the woods to look for a white rabbit. That meant Louisiana couldn't have gone far. Venturing deeper into the forest, the main character spotted the princess, but for some reason, Jamarin was with her. He was holding her hands and saying something, smiling sweetly. Inez's eyes widened instantly, and her heart started pounding with fear. The young maid rushed over to the princess and pulled her away from the guy. Then she started yelling, asking him what the heck he thought he was doing. Jamarin tried to explain that the princess had fallen while chasing a rabbit, and he was just brushing the dirt off her clothes. Inez told Her Highness to head back, promising she'd be right behind her. Louis nodded as soon as the main character told her to hurry, and then the little girl ran down the road, anxiously looking back. Our heroine flinched when Jamarin got to his feet and asked why she was so wary of him. With a sly grin, the guy suggested that maybe she knew him, to which the main character replied that was impossible. The man said he'd heard she was Miss Swinton, and memories immediately started swirling in Inez's head. The main character froze, feeling the fear rising inside her. Jamarin stepped closer, adding that no matter how much he thought about it, this was the first time he'd heard that name today. So why did he have this feeling? Like Lady Swindon already knew him. The main character asked point blank if she was supposed to answer the question. The man approached and answered no. But suddenly, his smile vanished as Jamarin noticed and pointed out that the clothes the lady was wearing were definitely not feminine. Inez tensed up even more, not knowing what to do. She froze as Jamarin got really close and leaned in towards her face, staring intently into her eyes. And then, with a crazy grin, he asked if the shirt belonged to a lord. The main character took a step back, but suddenly tripped over a rock lying on the ground. She just ate it, slammed right into the ground, and it looked like it hurt. Being clumsy like that, the poor girl scraped up her right arm and tore her shirt. Jamarin held his hands up, like, "Easy now," but she saw right through his act. Out of nowhere, the guy reached for her. Her eyes went wide, Her heart hammered in her chest, and she was begging him in her head to back off. But all Inez could do was flinch, shut her eyes tight, and turn away, bracing for something bad. But nothing happened, so she opened her eyes, totally confused why Jemaran hadn't done anything. The guy asked her to take his hand so he could help her up, saying a Viscount's daughter shouldn't be seen like this. What he said totally threw her for a loop. Right, she's not Romfield's prisoner anymore. She's a Viscount's daughter, and a baronet's nothing compared to that. Right now, Jemaran's a nobody, barely scraping into the aristocracy, and he'll never truly be one of them. The guy was caught off guard when the lady suddenly told him to back off. The main character stood up, clutching her injured arm. Then she decided to cut to the chase, asking if Jemaran was really a nobleman, because he was acting clueless. Inez explained that she'd heard he only recently got the title of baronet, so he's totally clueless about etiquette. After all, she fell and got hurt because of his rude comments and actions. What Inez really wanted to know was why Jemaran had moved on her so aggressively when they were all alone. The guy tried to explain, but the main character added that the same thing applied to Her Highness the Princess earlier. Even though the princess didn't ask for help, he just couldn't stand by and watch someone in trouble. The main character explained that in the Kain's Empire, you can't touch members of the imperial family without their express permission, and if a woman did it, she'd be punished for insulting the imperial family. Inez glanced at Jemaran's hand and added, he could even lose it. The guy protested that he's just got a good heart, but she told him to get his heart in check and learn some manners. Lately, they're letting just anyone become nobles. The main character could clearly see Jemaran clenching his fists. He was trying his hardest to hold back his anger, because hearing that obviously stung, and Inez knew it. Jemaran's the kind of guy who'd torture you to death if you got on his nerves. Especially in the past, he was obsessed with Inez. Back then, he was terrifying and cruel, but the guy standing in front of her now is just a scrawny dude with a servile look on his face. Suddenly, the guy asked if everything depends on her decision, so shouldn't jump to conclusions. The main character suggested we just go outside and ask someone. While the other guys were out hunting in the woods, Lord Jemaran was off doing something by himself, in a place where only the girls were gathered. Jemaran clearly had nothing more to say, or maybe he just couldn't say it. The main character was waiting for an answer, but she didn't get one. So she told him that the baronet could only hope the princess wouldn't make a big deal out of it. This isn't the kind of thing that just goes away if Inez stays quiet. The main character turned away and told the guy she had to go. Inez walked down the road, heading back to hunting camp. The whole time, she was carefully listening for sounds behind her, staying alert. Reaching a tree, Inez stopped and turned around. Nobody was behind her, so Jemaran hadn't decided to chase her down just to mess with her. Feeling relieved, the girl collapsed onto the ground, completely drained. She'd barely managed to overcome her fear. Inez promised herself that from now on, Jemaran wouldn't even be able to lay a finger on her. Suddenly, the main character heard a familiar voice calling her name. Lifting her head, she saw Lord Carson, looking worried, rushing towards her. Inez immediately felt safe, but the Lord's sudden appearance was a total surprise. And Carson hadn't come alone. He had several knights with him. He immediately touched her and anxiously asked if she was okay. The main character immediately started apologizing for accidentally getting his clothes dirty, but Carson replied that wasn't what he was asking about. Muttering a curse under his breath, the man asked how she got so messed up. He scooped Inez right up and told the knights they were bugging out. The main girl started saying it was just a scratch. She could walk, but Carson snapped her name right back. The guy told her to listen up, because the wound was bleeding way too much right now. All this caring from a stranger? It totally threw the main character for a loop. She agreed with the guy, and they headed back to camp. From there, they got the main character to the Lord's Manor, where the healer patched her up good. Luckily, the cut wasn't too deep, just needed a few stitches, but she lost a lot of blood and needed to rest up now. Inez chuckled, because the princess and Carson had the exact same look on their faces. Seeing that, the Lord asked her what she was laughing about. The main character explained that it looked worse than it actually was. It didn't hurt that bad, except she needed stitches, so Carson was totally lost on what she was even talking about. According to the Lord, the main character told Louis she saw a lady near a dangerous beast, and he rushed to help. Inez was completely baffled by this information. Louis explained to her brother that a snake had crawled onto her dress. It was disgusting, but Inez managed to get it off. Carson replied that if the snake had bitten her, there would have been big problems. If the Lord knew they were talking about Jamarone, not a snake, he wouldn't have let it slide. The main character wanted to tell the truth, but there's probably a reason Louisiana lied. Back in her study, Carson started wondering what this dangerous beast was supposed to be. Ever since she was a kid, Lewis has been comparing annoying people to animals. Looks like she's still got that habit. Because if you think about it, when Carson came out of the woods, someone else was there. It's possible that person was Jamarone Winston. He's definitely got snake vibes, and according to the Countess Winston, he's desperate to claw his way into high society. The woman herself said that Jamarone was practically begging for a meeting with the Lord. Instead of taking advantage of a great opportunity to participate in the hunting festival with everyone else, Jamarone chose a different path for himself. For some reason, he decided to go to a place where only ladies relax. Thinking about this recklessness, Carson smirked. Noah, who was running an errand in Landhill during the festival, entered the study and asked how Lady Swendon got hurt. Carson explained it happened when she was trying to get away from a dangerous animal, and Noah was glad she wasn't seriously injured. The Lord agreed, though I'm hoping I'm just imagining things. But remembering Inez's reaction, something's definitely up. Carson ordered his assistant to dig up some dirt on Jamarone Winston. He explained that we're talking about a guy who just became a baronet, and the Lord also wants Noah to find out if Jamarone's been mixed up in any lady troubles. The assistant asked if this had anything to do with Lady Swendon, and Carson didn't deny it. Just to be sure, Noah asked if the boss was planning to take care of Jamarone, and Carson's eyes went ice cold. The assistant immediately shut his mouth and scribbled some more notes in his pad. Carson knew damn well there were other guys around Inez that needed to disappear. We're talking about Earl Graham and Joseph. They gotta go before things get really out of hand. This dude decided he needed to carefully eliminate all obstacles. He remembered his sister's worried face when she ran to him, frantically telling him something bad had happened. At first, Carson didn't get what could be so urgent that Louis came rushing to him like that. But as soon as the princess said Inez was in danger, Carson instantly felt fear and a burning need to save her. Everything felt heightened in that moment. To prevent any further complications, Inez needs to stick close to him. Just like the Lord requested, Noah checked the Swendon Viscountcy mines. And the guy was right. There was something fishy going on there. The entrance was guarded by Earl Graham's knights, like they were searching for something inside. Still, it's a mine, so it was pretty much expected from a greedy guy like the Earl, always chasing after the big bucks. It's been over 5 years since Earl Graham got into the railroad construction business. Maybe he was looking for the best route for it through Landhill and found something in the Swendon lands. But did he really use Inez in his twisted schemes just to swipe the mine? But it'd be tough to grab a mine just by getting hitched. You can only imagine how low he was planning to stoop after that. The main character's sleep that night was restless, filled with uneasy feelings and fears. She dreamed of memories from the past, when people started blaming her for things she didn't do, out of nowhere. Every new person brought new info against her, chipping away at her self-confidence. In the end, the sacred court under the protection of the water goddess Hyraxia delivered its verdict, sentencing the lady to 30 years in Romfeld. After those words, Inez's eyes snapped open, and she gasped for air. Except instead of a cozy bed, she was back in that prison cell she knew all too well, full of dark memories. The main character started looking around, realizing with horror where she'd ended up again. Lena was sitting nearby, muttering to herself, lost in her own thoughts. Listening closely, Inez could make out her words. The blonde kept repeating that she'd done something really, really bad to someone important. The main character couldn't believe this was happening. She couldn't be back in Romfield. Suddenly, the girl felt a dark presence behind her. Jamarone was standing outside the prison bars, smirking wickedly. Inez looked up and stared at him, filled with dread. Then she spotted another painfully familiar man standing nearby. He suddenly started laughing at her miserable situation. The main character started crawling back towards the wall as Jamarone and Joseph entered the prison cell, grins plastered on their faces. Both of them asked in sickly sweet voices why she ran off, and even started bothering other people. The men called Inez a worthless little pest and promised she could never escape them, scaring her even more. The main character screamed her head off, telling them to get lost and leave her alone, but it didn't faze them, so she yanked Joseph's sword out of its sheath and yelled, like she already told them to stop bothering her. Buying herself a few precious seconds, Inez bolted out of the prison cell. Bursting out into the pouring rain, she begged the guys to just vanish from her life. All she wanted was for them to finally leave her in peace and let her live without looking over her shoulder. Inez stopped dead and tilted her face up to the sky, letting the rain wash over her. Suddenly, Carson rushed up to her, looking totally freaked out, and called her name, his voice full of real worry. The main character just gave him this tired look. They were both soaked to the bone in seconds, but Carson kept moving towards Inez, even though she was holding a sword. Tears started streaming down her face. This guy was here again, trying to pull her out of the nightmare and give her hope. The first time it happened was when she fell into the lake and almost drowned. The second time, the main character was standing in the square, bleeding out. Even when she faced that nightmare again, with Jamarin showing up, Carson protected her once more, and Inez was beyond grateful. The guy rushed over to the heroine and grabbed her hand tight. Then he pulled her close, held her to his chest, and kept saying it was all okay now, that she could trust him. Hearing that, the main character finally broke down, letting out all the emotions she'd been holding in. The sword clattered to the ground, and the girl just started apologizing. But Carson wasn't having it, because he knew Inez hadn't done anything wrong. But the heroine pulled away and begged for forgiveness even more desperately, saying she didn't mean for any of this to happen. Inez just wanted them to show her mercy and leave her alone. Carson was totally confused, no idea how to react to such weird words and the girl's emotional outburst. Suddenly, Inez passed out, but the guy caught her just in time, so she didn't face-plant the ground. When our main girl woke up, the sun was already shining, filling the room with warmth. Inez slowly opened her eyes, trying to figure out where she was and what happened to her the night before. Then she slowly sat up in bed. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her head. The young woman had absolutely no clue what happened yesterday. She must have been tripping hard, imagining that run-in with those jerks in Romfield who tried to mess with her and bring her down. But then she met Carson and started begging him for forgiveness. Still, the main thing she couldn't figure out was why she had a sword back then. Suddenly, the girl realized this wasn't a hallucination. It was real. She shot out of bed, deciding she needed to get to Carson right now and clear up this whole mess. But as she opened her bedroom door, she bumped right into a strange guy with bright red hair. Surprise flashed across the hero's face as soon as he saw Lady Swinton awake. Inez, confused, asked the stranger who he was, trying to figure out why he was here and what he wanted. The man introduced himself, Marcus Knight, a knight of Landhill. Turns out he's been ordered to patrol, but then she noticed the bandage on his hand. Marcus was surprised she remembered what happened last night, but told her not to worry, it was just a scratch. The main character realized she was the one who'd wounded him last night and started to freak out, asking if he was okay. The man smiled and said everything was fine, and that she didn't do it on purpose. That's exactly why Inez shouldn't apologize, even if her actions led to the injury. It's not her fault. As a knight, Marcus did what he had to do. If anything, it's on him for not being able to prevent it. Inez figured this guy was from a knightly family, and his words just confirmed it. But Marcus didn't see it that way. If he'd done his job, the lady wouldn't have gotten hurt by that sword she was swinging around. The main character's expression turned sad. She noticed this guy looked kinda rough, like he was in some serious discomfort. Inez asked Marcus a question he wasn't expecting. If he wasn't from a knightly family, what would he want to be in life? The main character got the feeling Marcus had a different dream he wanted to chase. The guy didn't say anything, which made the silence super awkward. Realizing the silence, Marcus immediately apologized, explaining that nobody had ever asked him that before, and he wasn't ready for it. For a second there, the guy was totally lost. He didn't know what to say. Inez chuckled, saying it was pretty rude of her to grill a knight's son about his career choices like that. Her words caught Marcus off guard, got him thinking. Then he confessed that ever since he was a kid, he'd wanted to be a doctor, still dreams of practicing medicine and helping people. The main girl listened intently, then said it was awesome to have such a noble ambition. Marcus looked confused, asking what she meant, since a lot of people think it's a pretty lame career. Our girl admitted she was even a little jealous, 'cause that's seriously amazing. He's found something he actually wants in life, and she wishes she could say the same. The main girl gave Marcus a surprised look when he suddenly thanked her for understanding. He'd never told anyone before that he had another dream besides becoming a knight and doing his duty, especially since Marcus never expected to hear someone was jealous. Since some people say working at the hospital is a dead-end job, Inez was saying that if it were her, she'd definitely go for whatever she wanted. 'Cause life's too damn short for regrets. Gotta make your move before it's too late, you know? A warm smile spread across Marcus's face. The guy promised he'd remember her words and be bolder. The main girl thought Marcus's red hair looked like warm sunlight. His warm, genuine smile could warm you up even on the coldest, frostiest day. Inez jumped a little, hearing a familiar and pleasant voice calling her name. Turning her head, the main character spotted Carson standing nearby. For some reason, the Lord's expression was sad. Marcus immediately bowed his head and greeted his lordship with the proper respect, like a true knight should. Carson gave Inez a good look, then asked her to come over to him, not taking no for an answer. As for the knight, the Lord gave him the green light to head out and take care of his own stuff. Inez took a few steps toward Carson, but froze, like she was torn about something. Then she went over to Marcus and whispered in his ear, so no one else could hear what she was saying. She promised she'd be there for him, helping him get what he wanted. 'Cause dreams gotta come true, right? Marcus smiled and thanked the lady for being so kind and understanding. Then the guy turned around and walked off. For some reason, the main girl just knew they'd run into each other again down the road. Inez rushed over to the Lord and asked what was up, her voice all worried. Carson gently touched her cheek and told her the doc said she should chill in bed today and get some rest. But Inez didn't hear any of that. She'd literally just woken up. Suddenly, the guy begged Inez to just listen to him, just this once. The main character figured Carson probably had something important to say to her, on top of everything else. The Lord confirmed it, and that made Inez curious about what he wanted to talk about. Carson started to answer, but then just clammed up, like the words got stuck in his throat. His face started turning beet red, and instead of answering, he said they should talk later when the time was right. He promised to call a doctor and told her to go back inside and get some rest. Inez wondered if maybe they'd gotten a little bit closer. The door burst open, and Susan rushed into the room, looking worried sick. The main character, surprised, sat up in her comfy bed, staring at the girl, totally confused about what was going on. The maid burst into tears, her voice trembling, asking what was going on. But Inez reassured her, saying it was nothing serious. Inez asked Susan, confused, why she'd come so late, saying she must have more important things to do. First, the incident in the square with the unexpected fall, now the hunting festival, and the lady keeps getting hurt. The main character awkwardly agreed, trying not to let her confusion show in front of the maid. Memories of last night and Carson's strong embrace immediately flashed through Inez's mind. Susan's words made the main character think she wasn't being told the whole story about what really happened. The maid confessed that she actually wanted to come right away when she heard about the incident with her lady. But the prince showed up and told her he'd send the lady back to the castle when she was better, so there was nothing to worry about. Because of those words, Mr. Swendon ended up in a tight spot. He was totally beside himself because the 8th prince had told him not to worry about his daughter's condition. The main character was totally taken aback when Susan told her about that weird conversation with the prince. Suddenly, the maid realized she'd forgotten something super important and decided to fix it, like ASAP. She pulled a hidden envelope out of her pocket and handed it to her mistress. Inez took the letter, curious, and Susan explained that it was from some young lady. The main character's face immediately went all surprised when she saw who the sender was. In the letter, Charlotte was sweetly asking Inez how she was feeling, since she'd heard the young lady got hurt at the competition. The noblewoman wanted to visit her new friend at the mansion, but wrote a letter instead. After finding out she was somewhere else, Charlotte made sure to ask Inez to let her know when she was feeling better. The main character started smiling, realizing that this girl genuinely cared about her. When she gets back to Swindon, she'll have to get a gift ready for Charlotte as a thank you for her concern and thoughtfulness. After a few days, the girls finally managed to meet at Charlotte's mansion and chat in peace. Charlotte confessed she really liked Landhill and wished her husband could stay longer. The main character replied that she wished that too, so they could see each other and hang out as much as possible. Hearing that confession, Charlotte's face flushed with both embarrassment and joy. She started waving her hand in front of her face, trying to cool down and hide her blush. The main character wondered why Charlotte was wearing such heavy clothes in this heat. Wasn't she boiling? but Inez decided to ask her when she was due and how she was feeling these days. The doctor told Charlotte it would be in about 5 months, so she should start getting ready for the big day. Something caught the main character's eye, a portrait hanging above the fireplace. Inez examined it closely, taking in all the details. The painting showed this imposing dude, dark hair, with a serious, almost gloomy look on his face. The main character asked Charlotte if that was really her husband. The girl nodded and added, with sadness in her voice, that it was a marriage of convenience, not love. That guy helped her family out when they were in a tight spot, so she knew she'd end up marrying him. Charlotte learned that Inez would be of age soon, so she wondered if she had any prospects lined up. The main character said no way, because marriage was a word that would never darken her door again. Charlotte advised her to find someone kind and gentle, because if it's just a business arrangement, you better think it through. She figured that was way more important than money or even love, which can be super misleading. The main character wondered why Charlotte was singling out those specific qualities. It was all pretty sus and raised a ton of questions for Inez. Before long, it was time to say goodbye, and Charlotte thanked Inez for the time they spent together. The girls parted ways, and our girl headed home, replaying everything she'd just heard in her head. Her gaze instantly turned icy, her face like a mask. Charlotte's husband was even more of a lowlife than she'd realized, and it was seriously messing with Inez's head. Those bruises on her neck and arms? Definitely his doing, and Inez felt like she had to step in. To get the lowdown, our girl decided she needed to visit Charlotte more often and keep an eye on her. But first, Inez needed to sort out her own stuff and get her head straight after everything that's gone down. Gotta find a good spot quick so she can get it done before sunset. Seemed like she saw a hill behind the mansion. Of course, our girl had heard there was a flat spot on the mountainside in Swindon with killer views of the whole area. But Inez had no idea this place was so beautiful and peaceful. Plus, she hadn't run into a single soul on the way, which was already amazing. Little did our main character know she wasn't alone here and was about to bump into someone. She soaked up the sun and the gorgeous view, forgetting all her worries. There really was gold here, but Noah couldn't figure out how the boss knew about it. Carson replied, "The geology's all wrong for diamonds. In that case, it's either iron or gold. Rassonia's got plenty of iron, so there's gotta be something here as valuable as gold for him to be so desperate to come. But if the Empress knew about a gold mine, she wouldn't have given Carson Swindon so easily. So, Count Graham was trying to swipe the gold behind the Empress's back. Noah almost ran into his boss's back when he suddenly stopped and told him to do the same. The Lord asked his assistant if he was seeing the same thing. They were talking about a girl walking through the woods. She looked painfully like Inez Swinton. Just like Carson thought, it was her. The assistant tensed up because he noticed the Lord's mood immediately took a turn for the worse. The Lord said with annoyance that he should be calling her Inez Troublemaker, not Inez Swinton. This was taking longer than our girl thought. It was getting so late. She jumped as soon as a voice behind her called her Troublemaker and asked what she was doing there. Turning around, Inez noticed Carson and asked him what he was doing there. But that was the very question he wanted to ask. Her! Carson couldn't understand what the young lady was doing so far out in the mountains. The girl explained, flustered, that it was such a lovely day. She just went for a little walk. Silence hung in the air after those words. Carson replied skeptically that it was indeed a beautiful place for a walk, and Inez admitted she was a little lost. But she decided to quickly change the subject and asked what kind of business they had in the mountains. The man wanted to announce it tomorrow, but since they'd met, he decided to say it now. They'd discovered what Count Graham was after. Carson explained that there was something in the Swindon lands that this aristocrat desperately wanted. The main character's expression changed, and she asked what it was. Carson paused for a second, then explained that Count Graham was targeting the mine on this mountain, or rather, the gold that's inside it. During the investigation, Carson managed to find out that there's a ton of it, so the Count's goal became obvious. Hearing that, the main character gave a nervous little laugh. She was instantly flooded with memories of the nightmare she went through in her past life. And it all happened just because some noble wanted to get his hands on all the gold in the mines. Carson called out to Inez, worried when he saw her start to tremble. The main character broke down. It was all just about some greedy jerk wanting to get rich, and she couldn't accept it. The 8th prince pulled her close, trying to comfort her somehow. He gently stroked her hair and quietly said her name. But all the main character could think about was that if it weren't for Carson, she never would have known anything, which made her feel both angry and relieved. Carson announced that the Viscounty of Swindon had completely passed into Landhill's possession. That mountain has nothing to do with Rizonia anymore. So what this means is, no matter what happens in Swinton now, Count Graham can't get his hands on that gold mine. To her, it meant she was finally safe. Nobody could take her mother, her father, her status, or her life away from her anymore. If Inez hadn't asked Carson to hand Swinton over to Landhill, he never would have found out about any of this. So, all of this came to light only because of Inez's request. Getting to the base of the mountain was faster than Carson originally thought. Inez said she wasn't crying anymore, so the Lord could let her go. But Carson agreed to only do it after she got into the carriage. There were people walking nearby. If she showed her face now, the common folk would think the Lord made her cry. After getting into the carriage, Inez asked, puzzled, why they would think that. The man sat across from her and explained that they attracted more attention at the banquet than they realized, so they needed to get moving first. The coachman tightened the reins and the horses bolted. The main character was bummed, realizing it was already time to head home. Out of the blue, she asked the Lord to just drop her at the estate entrance, but he insisted she ride all the way in comfort. The main character confessed that if her mom found out she snuck out, she'd be in for a serious lecture. The guys chuckled, realizing that to her parents, the lady was still just a little kid. Suddenly, Noah spotted something out the window and told his lord to take a look. Standing outside was the guy currently in charge of the Rizonian Railroad. Her face was burning with anger as he was chewing out a servant. Inez realized with dread who it was, while Noah mentioned the guy had a pretty unusual last name, but he couldn't quite place it. The main character said the guy belonged to the Dropanoy family, and Noah was surprised, asking how she knew. Instead of answering, Inez told the Lord they had to follow that guy immediately. Carson was clueless, and the main character explained that it was her friend's husband, and he had a violent streak. That guy's a real piece of work to his pregnant wife. If he's this angry now, something awful could happen to her friend. The eighth prince flinched, hearing the desperation in Inez's voice. He ordered the coachman to follow that carriage immediately. Soon, they arrived at the mansion, where the main character's friend was currently living with her husband. The heroes jumped out of the carriage and immediately rushed inside. The main character's heart skipped a beat as soon as she heard Charlotte's desperate scream coming from somewhere upstairs. And then, right before her eyes, her friend's husband fell out of the window. The main character watched in horror as his body landed on the ground with a sickening thud. Carson immediately covered Inez's eyes so she wouldn't have to see that. The rain started coming down, making this evening even more depressing. But Charlotte's husband wasn't dead. Seeing the nobles in front of him, he barely whispered for help. Carson immediately ordered Noah to get a doctor ASAP, and they'd find the guy's wife in the meantime. Inez threw open the door and asked, all worried, if Charlotte was in here. A look of pure horror flashed across her face the second she saw what the room had become. Charlotte was sitting by the window, bruised all over and totally drained, with blood running from her nose. The main character ran to her friend right away, still trying to process what she was seeing. Charlotte started crying when she recognized Inez. The noblewoman broke down, convinced she'd pushed him and killed her husband, but Inez told her that wasn't true. Charlotte explained that as soon as her husband got back, he started hitting her again, and to save their child, she pushed him away, but the window was open. But what scared the aristocrat most was the situation downstairs. She hoped the baby was all right. Carson scooped Charlotte up and said she needed to see their doctor, Stat. As soon as they reached the carriage, Noah said the guy's injury was bad, but they got him help fast. The Lord announced they were heading to the estate to get the lady patched up and told his assistant to fill in the guards. The main character jumped as soon as her bedroom door finally opened. Carson appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses and a bottle of bubbly. Sitting across from her, the man said Charlotte Dropanoir was currently out like a light. Inez must have been totally freaked out today, so the guy suggested a little drink and some chill time. Carson added that he'd already let the Swindon family know everything, so she had nothing else to sweat. The main character was about to start apologizing all over again, but the Lord cut her off, said it wasn't necessary since the incident happened on his land. Inez asked about the kid, and the guy just shook his head like, no. The main character got the picture, and after a beat, She asked if she could have saved him if she'd been a little quicker. Carson just couldn't wrap his head around why Inez was always blaming herself and apologizing so much. I mean, she doesn't owe this world a damn thing. Besides, if they'd shown up any later, that other dude would have been in deep trouble too, and probably kicked the bucket without getting any help. Charlotte was just defending herself, so she'll probably just get sent to a temple or a convent. Is her friend really not going to Romfield? Did the main character actually manage to change Charlotte's future? Inez asked where the proof of self-defense was, since they only showed up after everything went down. Carson put his glass down and told Inez she was getting her wires crossed. They definitely saw that guy punching his wife in the stomach. Hearing that, Inez looked totally bewildered. Carson explained that Charlotte had no choice but to push the guy away in that situation. The lady was clearly exhausted, so the Lord tucked her into bed and said he'd stay until she fell asleep, because he didn't want the girl to hurt his night again. But after that, a warm smile spread across Carson's face. Feeling calm and secure, the main character started to drift off to sleep pretty quickly. After a while, Carson poured his assistant a glass of wine and told him he'd done a good job. The guard reported that Charlotte would be taken into custody as soon as she was physically recovered. The Lord asked his assistant to try and speed up the legal proceedings. Carson asked about Jamarin, and Noah said no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find any connection to Lady Swinton. But he did manage to dig up some dirt. This guy wants to become a warden at Romfield. Of course, wanting to be a warden isn't exactly a crime. Noah handed the Lord a sheet of paper and said the problem is that Jamarin has certain proclivities. The Lord figured this guy's looking for someone to prey on. The assistant confirmed the Lord's suspicions, saying the last victim lost their eyes. Jamarin seriously messed up, no doubt. He specifically chose victims from rural areas and worked his butt off to get the title of Baron just for a position in Romfield. His real reasons are so obvious, it's sickening. With a title, it won't be hard for him to get the job. And in 10 years, he could climb to prison director. So basically, Jamarin wants to play God in his own little world. That's why he's been sneaking around here. If he becomes warden, a lot of people are going to get hurt. Noah also mentioned there was something else really weird. Carson gave his assistant a hard look and asked, "What's that?" All his victims are blonde girls. And get this, 3 of them also had green eyes. Carson swore under his breath, calling Jamarin a real piece of work. The Lord decided we absolutely have to get someone on this. But Noah's already taken care of it. He's got a guy keeping tabs on Jamarin 24/7. That's not who I'm worried about, though. Carson wants someone assigned to Inez, to keep her safe. Noah didn't think it was a good idea, though, seeing as the boss wasn't even engaged to this girl yet. True, Carson could already picture the noblewoman's face when she found out about this. So, the Lord suggested doing it secretly. If they got caught, they'd just say they did it for the lady's safety. Even that walk in the mountains today was super dangerous. Carson honestly didn't get what was going on in that little head, but Noah totally didn't understand what the Lord was talking about. The Lord figured it was better to have an escort. What's the big deal? Especially since he was only going to assign people until he got everything sorted out. As morning broke, the main character decided to leave Carson's mansion and head back home. The heroine jumped when the guy behind her asked if she was really going to leave without saying anything. Turning around, Inez saw Carson staring intently at her. The girl awkwardly explained she'd been about to greet him, but heard he was busy and didn't want to interrupt. Carson mumbled like, "Hasn't everyone figured it out yet? You know, about him and Inez?" Before she could leave, he suggested a little walk, said he had something to tell her, and she agreed. The Lord asked Inez if she'd ever been outside the estate grounds in her life. The main character smiled and said, "Nope." Then Carson asked if there was any place she wanted to visit, but Inez wasn't sure and asked him if he'd traveled much. Because of his job, the Lord had to visit a lot of countries, and he realized people need someone to think about. Ultimately, that's exactly why he came back. A certain someone. The main character guessed that person for Carson was his younger sister Louis. Carson revealed that the trial for Earl Graham was happening soon. He was involved in the attack on a member of the royal family, and thanks to Inez, they got Elena's testimony. Now's the perfect time for a trial. And the punishment for this guy will be death, by hanging for attacking a member of the royal family. Inez thought that was a fitting end for such a lowlife. Out of nowhere, Carson added that after the trial, he's planning on taking off for a while, got some business to handle. Silence hung in the air, and the guy turned to see Inez's reaction. The girl sadly asked how long he'd be gone. She was stunned when he said about 3 months. Inez's mood just tanked. Carson noticed and added that it might only take 2 months. Taking a step towards Inez, the hero thought about how he must be losing his mind. But our main girl couldn't figure out why his being gone was bugging her so much. Carson promised the young woman he'd be back in 2 months and asked her to hang tight and try not to do anything crazy. The main character lowered her head and said, "Okay." Out of the blue, the guy told Inez not to worry, promising it would all be over soon. He'd make damn sure she was all right. So from now on, Inez had nothing to worry about. She just needed to live and enjoy every day. The paper said that Earl Graham was the prime suspect in that big, scandalous case involving the attack on a member of the royal family. Last month, there was that brazen assault in Rasonia Square, and it turned out Earl Graham was the one who orchestrated it. Word is, he's going on trial soon, and it's going to be a huge deal for the aristocracy and everyone else. The main character jumped, hearing footsteps nearby that broke the silence and pulled her away from her reading. The maid told the lady Sir Joseph was here again today. Ever since the Earl got locked up, he's been showing up every single day. Inez wondered just how much he'd suffer if Earl Graham kicked the bucket. The main character asked Susan to tell the guest they couldn't meet today. In that case, Joseph asked her to pass the lady a letter he'd carefully prepared, hoping for a reply. Looks like he decided to write it since he can't get a meeting with the aristocrat. Joseph wrote that he's constantly trying to see Inez. His heart aches for her more each day, and being apart is like death to him. If the lady refuses him again, the guy promised their situation would be all over town. Things were just getting worse every day, but Inez just coldly told Susan to burn the letter. Joseph's been acting totally out of character lately, so the maid anxiously asked if everything would be all right. Inez knew perfectly well it wasn't time yet. Joseph needed to get even angrier. Only then would he come to her personally and really let her have it. Like Susan said, it could be risky for both of them, so Inez suggested they get an escort and visit Charlotte. The girls hadn't seen each other in ages because of, everything, so Inez immediately asked her friend how she was doing. Charlotte said she was doing much better now. Everyone there treated her really well, probably because they thought she was tight with the Lord. That made Inez happy. She asked if anything untoward had happened to her friend lately. Actually, Charlotte's husband had tried to talk to her a few times, but she refused. She just wasn't ready to face him. The main character told her she shouldn't have to see him, not after everything they'd been through. Charlotte agreed with her. Now there wasn't even a kid to keep them together, which meant there was absolutely no reason for them to reconcile after all the drama that had gone down. With tears in her eyes and a smile, she said it was actually for the best. If it wasn't for what happened to her husband, she wouldn't have been able to escape this whole terrible nightmare and find freedom. Charlotte admitted that every day she thinks about how lucky she was to have gone to that hunting festival. If her husband had died on the spot during that incident, without Inez's and the Lord's testimony, Charlotte would have just been sent to Romfield. Luckily, she won't have to experience that, although now she has to work for 5 years at the Edmonton Temple as a servant. Her husband didn't die. It was just self-defense, and now she could continue living without burdening herself with the weight of loss. The main character mentioned that the Edmonton Temple is located in Sanskrit. Charlotte excitedly asked if it was possible they'd be going there by train. She thought she'd never get to ride one in her life, because trains always seemed so romantic to her. Inez smiled warmly, seeing her friend in such good spirits. The girl touched Charlotte's hand, showing her support, like saying she was with her, and they'd get through this together. The main character got curious about Charlotte's real last name, not Dropinois. Her friend grinned and revealed that her name was Charlotte McFadyen. The young woman hadn't introduced herself that way in ages, which made her feel awkward, like she was going back to something forgotten. Inez asked her friend to live by her real last name now, since the past was over, so she could start a new life. From now on, her life belonged only to her, and she could choose her path without looking back at old mistakes. Charlotte laughed and said she liked it. The main character was happy that in this life, she could protect Charlotte. As soon as the girls said goodbye, Inez told Susan that they needed to swing by the hardware store for some supplies. The main character was determined to buy something. As soon as the purchase went through, the maid asked the miss, all surprised, what she needed it for, 'cause it looked kinda weird. For some reason, the lady decided to buy some wire. Inez explained it was her father's errand, And how would she know more than that? And now our main character suggested they head back home. Suddenly, though, Inez felt like someone was watching her, and that feeling gave her the creeps. She turned around, but didn't see anyone. But that weird feeling just wouldn't shake off. Susan noticed the miss was acting kinda tense, and looking worried, asked if everything was all right. Inez admitted that she thought they were being followed. The maid, not believing her ears, asked if it was Sir Joseph, but the main character told her to keep it down. As soon as they got to the narrow alley, Inez told her a mysterious guy was about to show up. The main character knew for a fact he'd been tailing them for a while, like a predator stalking its prey. The second he popped around the corner, Inez immediately ordered the knight to grab him, no questions asked. In a flash, the stalker was pinned against the wall. The main character stepped closer and asked with icy curiosity why he was following her. Jamarin Winningstone smirked as soon as the lady addressed him by name, recognizing him instantly. The guy feigned innocence, asking what she was even talking about, trying to hide why he was really there. He came to the market with a specific purpose, to carry out an assignment. The main character asked skeptically if it was really just a coincidence, but Jamarin exclaimed indignantly that he just came to buy tea leaves, and she could ask the local merchants to confirm. Inez told the knight to let him go, and he immediately obeyed the young lady's request. But the main character said, clearly annoyed, that if this was just a coincidence, she hoped these kinds of accidents wouldn't happen again. Jamarin smiled and silently bowed to the noblewoman. Susan wondered if it was okay to just drop the matter like that, since she'd already seen something weird recently. Turns out, the maid had left something in the carriage and decided to go back to get it. But there was a guy in there she'd never seen before, and he looked super shady. The weird thing was, he was sniffing the carriage seat with his nose. At that point, Susan couldn't help but scream in terror. The guy immediately jumped when he realized he'd been spotted. Then he shoved Susan and just ran off, and she never got a good look at his face. At first, she thought he was just some bum, so she kept her suspicions to herself. But now she thinks Jamarin looks a lot like him. The main character clenched her fists, mentally calling the guy a real piece of work for acting so brazen. He's trying to pull the same crap he did back in Romfield even now. Looks like Inez's actions are speeding up some events from her past life. Meanwhile, back at the Swendon estate, taking a sip of his hot drink, the man sincerely apologized for the sudden and unexpected visit. Carson explained that he needed to leave the estate urgently, so he thought it was important to visit the Viscount and Viscountess. Inez's parents listened intently to the suddenly arrived lord. There'd been rumors lately about their daughter and this gentleman, but Andrew Swendon never thought they'd learn the truth in such an unusual way. Carson asked the Viscount how he planned to manage the mine, offering to send someone to help if needed. The blonde was thinking, can running a tiny mine really be that hard? Why's the lord so stressed about it? The guy said their mine's small, so it's not a huge deal to manage. The Viscount and Viscountess were thrown when the lord just blurted out that if Inez hadn't told them anything, they'd just have to wait. But then her parents were even more stunned that the 8th prince just called their daughter by her first name, not just Lady Swindon. Carson stood up and said he was heading outside, since the lady should be back soon, and he wanted to meet her. He told Noah to stay put, because he needed to discuss something with the lady in private. And then the master left, leaving the main character's parents totally confused. The Viscountess asked, worried, is this how young people visit each other these days before leaving, even if they're not dating? This woman was like Lady Swindon in the way she asked off-the-wall questions, sparking interest and surprise in everyone around her. Noah said their lord would be making an official proposal to the Swindon family soon, and he's heading to the palace now to get permission. Hearing that, the Viscountess almost fainted from the shocking news. As soon as the main character stepped out of the carriage, Carson was already waiting for her, all eager with a slight smile on his face. Her first reaction was surprise at his unexpected appearance. She immediately ran up to the lord and asked with a smile how he ended up here, and Carson told her he was leaving today on important business. The smile faded from the main character's face as soon as she realized it was happening today, and she'd have to part with him. The man, with a tender smile, said that he had come specifically to spend some time with her before embarking on his long journey. Taking the lady's hand with tenderness and care, Carson said that he had something to tell her, but he also wanted to show her something. First, the man wanted to start with what he wanted to tell her. The trial of Earl Grey will be held behind closed doors next week. If the lady wishes, Carson can add her to the list of attendees for this trial. The main character gripped the book, relieved that her revenge was finally starting to unfold. And then she thanked the Lord and replied that she would very much like that. Carson noticed the lady was squeezing the book tightly, and as soon as he mentioned it, Inez dropped it. The Lord immediately bent down to pick up the fallen object. However, suddenly, a small portrait of Carson fell out of the book. The main character was horrified to see this. Carson's gaze sharpened the moment he noticed the fallen piece of paper. He immediately reached for it too, but Inez exclaimed that he shouldn't pick it up. Carson sharply raised the photograph above his head and playfully asked what she was talking about. Inez immediately reached for it. Realizing her attempt was pointless, she squeezed her eyes shut and sheepishly admitted it was a portrait of the Lord. Carson examined the photograph and asked how the lady managed to get her hands on it. Inez covered her face, embarrassed, and replied that Susan had helped her. Then the Lord asked if she couldn't have just asked him directly. Inez started rattling on, saying that lots of people had that portrait, since everyone thinks the Lord is the most handsome man in the empire. Even Susan has one. Carson was amazed at how long Inez could talk without stopping. Putting the photograph back in the book, he asked if Inez happened to have portraits of other people too. He handed the book back to the lady, and she blankly replied no. The Lord said that in that case, everything was fine, and then suggested they take a little walk, if the lady didn't mind. Carson reminded the lady he had something to show her, so they were heading out to see it right then. The main character asked, all confused, if he didn't want to ask her something first. Grinning, the guy said all mysterious-like that he already got his answer. Our heroes headed to a room where Carson immediately pulled out a map and slapped it on the table. He pointed out the route, from beginning to end, where the railroad would be built. Carson was also thinking about building a station in Swindon, even though Inez didn't remember one being there in her past life. The Lord added that right after that station, they could cross the Rezonian border. Suddenly, the guy asked the lady, all dramatic, if she knew what was at the end of the line. Turns out, at the very end, there's an actual ocean. It's nothing like a lake, not even close. Carson knew damn well just saying it was beautiful wouldn't cut it. He'd been there when he was younger. This amazing place that was just a pleasure to look at. Back then, Carson couldn't help but think, it's so beautiful here, even if it's a little sad that he couldn't control those waves, endlessly crashing against the sandy beach and turning into foam. They reminded him of a mirage. Even if they never showed Carson the same face twice, the waves kept rolling in, coming back to him. That's why the guy asked Inez if she didn't want to see the ocean. The main character admitted that she'd love to see what the Lord was talking about with such admiration. Carson grinned and promised the lady he'd definitely take her there. To do that, he absolutely had to get the rights to build a railroad that would cross the entire empire. That's why Carson was heading to the capital. Drapino was the one who originally designed this railway, and he currently holds the rights to it. Inez asked if Count Grey hadn't developed the railway plan, and since he's on trial, the royal family might reconsider the decision. But sadly, resolving this issue won't lead to anything. Grey already transferred all the paperwork to Drapinua's name. That means his punishment won't affect the situation at all, but there's still a chance. Carson promised to cut off their funding and force them to relinquish the rights. The man openly told the lady his plan. The main character understood perfectly well that this could take a long time. Suddenly, Inez noticed something strange and pointed to a spot on the map, so the gentleman would notice too. The man was surprised when the lady suddenly announced that this wasn't the correct route. Inez explained that the location of the Fistera terminal station isn't suitable land for laying a railway. Carson looked confused and asked the main character, surprised, how she knew that information. Realizing what she'd just said, Inez flinched. She remembered the conversation with the jailers, who were talking about the possibility of the ground being weak near the sea, too. That's exactly why Inez was sent there for forced labor in the past. But she told the Lord that she had only read in a book that the soil on Mount Fistera is very loose, and the deeper you dig, the more it collapses. Carson concluded that, in that case, it wouldn't be possible to build a tunnel through it. But he couldn't understand how Drapinoa, who had dedicated so many years to designing the railway, could not know this. Inez agreed with Carson's words, and sadly realized that the man didn't believe her. However, the Lord suddenly announced that he would ask Noah to check everything in more detail. The main character turned a surprised gaze to Carson's reddened face and asked if he was really going to do that. the Lord mumbled, looking flustered. There's no harm in double-checking, I guess. Besides, if Inez says so, it's gotta be true. The heroine was stoked. She could finally help the guy who's always had her back. If this route tanks, Carson gets the railroad rights. So the Lord told Noah to get the intel ASAP. Inez reminded him he said he'd be in the capital for the next 2 months. Carson backed that up and told the lady to stay out of trouble while he was gone. Inez said she'd try. Then, the guy walked over and gently took her hand. He promised that in 2 months, their lives would be totally different. That put a smile on the heroine's face. She was genuinely worried, telling the Lord to be careful on his trip and hurry back. The day of the trial finally arrived. The main character, with a knight at her side, also showed up at the courthouse to hear the verdict in Earl Graham's case. Stepping inside, Inez immediately spotted the defendant's family members. She wondered why Joseph wasn't here on such a crucial day for him. Soon, Earl Graham was brought into the courtroom. The guy looked totally wrecked now, almost pathetic, not like he was before. The hearing for the attempted assassination of a member of the royal family is now in session. The court requests that witness Elena Maria step forward and testify against the defendant. Earl Graham flinched, hearing footsteps behind him. The blonde stepped forward, introduced herself, and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this sacred court. Then the woman testified that Earl Graham threatened her. If she wanted her son to live, she had to kill the princess. Elena had no choice but to obey his orders to save her son, who was only 3 years old. Earl Graham yelled that this crazy woman was spouting total nonsense, but the witness just smirked and asked why else she would have done such a thing, since the Earl had drugged her. It happened as soon as the man gave her some kind of medicine, because he was afraid Lena would get scared and run. By medicine, the heroine meant a hallucinogen. In other words, a drug that clouds your mind. The judge announced that they needed to hear from more than one person and asked for the next witness to be brought in. A servant entered the hall and confirmed Elena's words. The Earl ordered her to drink the medicine, and he was the one who had to deliver it. Earl Graham immediately roared, calling the witness a damn traitor. The judge immediately ordered silence in the court and added that the aristocrat's crimes were beyond the pale. Kidnapping a child and threatening a count wasn't enough. He even forced hallucinogens on someone. Therefore, for attempting to murder a member of the imperial family, Count Graham was sentenced to death by hanging. Hearing the court's decision, the man desperately screamed that it couldn't be happening, but the guards immediately grabbed him to take him away. To the main character's surprise, the trial ended really fast. Starting tomorrow, all the newspapers will be screaming headlines about Count Graham being hanged by court order. Inez was curious to know what Joseph would do now. Upon learning the terrible news from the newspaper, the blonde guy cursed a blue streak because everything was going sideways. Joseph decided he urgently needed to meet with Inez. Carson entered the office and greeted Her Majesty the Empress. The woman asked what brought the prince to her at this hour. The man reminded her that Count Gray's trial had taken place today. Carson reported that he had spoken with him before the trial began. According to the aristocrat, Her Majesty the Empress was also involved in this affair. The woman's expression turned icy, and then she smiled, brought a champagne glass to her lips, and asked if the prince was really trying to strong-arm her right now. However, that wasn't the case, because Carson was only expressing his concern. The Empress replied that there was no need to worry, as things like this wouldn't break her. Carson agreed. This wouldn't affect this cunning woman in any way. However, she might miss out on a golden opportunity. The Lord confessed that he had come here with a request to hand Rizonia over to him. The Empress smirked, all sly, and wondered if he was cooking up something. But Carson shot that down, saying he just wanted a little more land. Compared to what the prince has done for the royal family, Landhill is way too small a reward. Carson thanked the Empress for her kind words and said he'd have a word with His Majesty himself. The Emperor pressed, so the son's back after all this time, and now he wants to be Lord of Rizonia? Carson shut that down quick, saying he was planning to add Rizonia to Landhill. His Majesty replied. Since the Empress already gave the green light, Carson didn't even need to bother him. Still, the prince was hoping his old man could grease the wheels and speed things up. The hero wanted it done within a month, but the Emperor said it'd take at least 3. Carson explained why he needed to get back there ASAP. He was getting hitched. The Emperor was floored by his son's words. Then, His Majesty wanted to know which family this dame came from. the one making the prince act this way. Carson said she was from the Landhill Viscount's family, and the Emperor promised to help, since it involved marriage. But Carson had another favor to ask. As far as he knew, they were currently deciding who got the rights to build the railroad from the capital to Razonia. The Emperor figured his son wanted to get the inside track on laying down that railroad. But Carson shot down the Emperor's idea, saying all he wanted was enough power to protect his family. The prince was done feeling helpless. The Emperor guessed Carson was holding a grudge because he couldn't protect him and his mother. Carson didn't hesitate to say that was exactly it, and His Majesty didn't even try to make excuses. The prince knew his dad had no choice, but he wanted to walk the same path. The Emperor agreed with him and promised to help his son become a good husband. The main character was chilling in the garden, soaking up the nature and reading her Bible. It's been a whole month since Carson left for the capital, to the Imperial Palace. Her attacks have gotten worse since he left, but Inez should start feeling better today. Because today's the day Count Graham gets what's coming to him. The main character wondered if Joseph had read her reply yet. In his last letter, the guy kept saying his patience was wearing thin, and he wouldn't leave Inez alone once they met. After reading that, the main character decided she had to respond to that letter. So she wrote back to Dear Joseph, telling him he'd been chasing a pipe dream from the start. How the hell did it come to this, that a servant working in her house dared to look down on the daughter of a noble family? The main character added that she had never felt any real feelings for him. Since Joseph insisted he wouldn't leave her alone, Inez dared him to try, confident he wouldn't lay a finger on her. Now that the family he served had lost their status, Joseph would no longer be called a knight. Maybe a little childish, but Inez had to do it this way to keep things on track. Just like the main character predicted, it actually worked. Joseph approached her and mentioned that it had been a while since they'd seen each other. This guy had no idea how much and how long the main character had been waiting for this moment. Inez walked up to Joseph and with a smile, agreed with what he said. Blondie said she's still as gorgeous as ever, and that just pisses him off even more. The main girl took the compliment, but told him she couldn't return the sentiment, which only made him glare harder. Since the weather was nice today, Inez suggested Joseph take a little walk with her. She wanted to show him something. As they walked, the guy asked, all annoyed, if they didn't have something to talk about, but she said she already covered it in the letter. Joseph couldn't take the cold shoulder and yelled, asking how she could just toss him aside so casually. She'd said she loved him. They were even planning the wedding. The main girl coldly replied to Joseph Benoit that even the wildest words should have their limits. Every time she saw his smirking face, Inez could barely hold back her disgust, and his sickening words were even worse. The girl wanted to gouge out those revolting eyes and rip out his foul tongue, tearing his mouth to shreds. Until today, the main girl had tried to avoid thinking that only his demise would bring her peace. Joseph flinched, asking hesitantly if she'd really lost her mind. Inez smirked, asking cryptically if she was the only one. The guy said he didn't get it. They'd been genuinely in love all this time. He even got the baronet title for her sake. But had Inez's love really just vanished? The main girl, dripping with sarcasm, told him not to make her laugh. Even a stray dog would find that ridiculous. Then she added mockingly that Joseph's imitation of a nobleman was just pathetic and laughable. The man clenched his fists, asking if that was the only reason. He recoiled as the lady said he had no idea how foolish he'd looked this entire time. Joseph lunged at Inez, saying even rudeness has its limits, and he wasn't going to take that kind of crap. But suddenly, a thin, strong rope whipped around his leg. The dude screamed, and Inez was all, "This is the exact spot I've been dying to show you." Grinning like a Cheshire cat, she asked, "Isn't it beautiful?" Joseph looked like he was about to lose it, and the blonde, hanging upside down, yelled totally stunned, "What the hell are you doing?" He had no clue why Inez was doing this to him. Joseph got seriously freaked, thinking this crazy chick was about to off him, especially since he hadn't done anything wrong. The main character just coldly replied, "Neither have I." But now, Joseph should just focus on the good stuff in his final moments, 'cause death comes for us all eventually. Seeing the confusion on his face, Inez asked, "Don't you know what the penalty is for taking someone's life?" The main character knew it better than anyone, but Joseph doesn't need to worry, because she's already paid the price. It's just that the order of things got a little mixed up. But the second this guy kicks the bucket, it's all over. The main character was about to bail, but she stopped herself. She realized if it ends like this life will be no different than the last. If she offs Joseph right here, right now, she'll actually be a killer this time. Her folks will have to go through hell all over again because of it. Even if they don't send her back to Romfield this time, she'll never be able to go back to a normal life. Besides, she can't show her face to Carson like this, not after he saved her life and helped her out so many times. Inez confessed that she knows the orders Joseph got from Count Graham. After the wedding, he was supposed to frame his wife for murder and send her to Romfield. Joseph was floored when he heard that. The main character yanked the rope and told the guy he's gonna have a hard time walking for a while. Joseph was surprised Inez decided to let him go. Even if this choice leads to her death again, the main character refused to become the same kind of monster he was. Suddenly, Carson dropped to his knees and told Inez she must be out of her mind. The guy actually admitted he was wrong. After everything that went down, this dude was bawling his eyes out in front of the main character, begging for forgiveness. "I guess the money messed with my head," Joseph said, and then immediately asked Inez for forgiveness. If it was this easy to make the guy regret it, Inez couldn't understand why he was doing it now, after 12 freaking years. Maybe it's because he's staring death right in the face. Inez told him his apologies were pointless now, but then suddenly, another person came charging out of the bushes. Time seemed to slow down as the heroine saw someone stab Joseph with a knife. Only then did she realize that the person was Jimiron. Joseph looked desperately at the main character and quietly called her name. Inez stared in horror as the guy just dropped dead right in front of her. Meanwhile, Jamiron said, "Totally cold." That was way too easy. The bloody knife slipped right out of his hand and clattered onto the grass. The guy walked up to Inez, grabbed her hand, and asked if she agreed with him. The main character gave a nervous chuckle, wondering if she was going to bite it in this life because of Jamiron instead of Joseph. Back in Romfeld, this dude was obsessed with her from the jump. "Is this whole thing going to happen all over again?" The guy froze, confused, and asked if Inez was laughing after what he'd just said and done. Though, obviously, the girls lost it if she was going to pull something that crazy. The main character frowned and asked point-blank why Joseph was doing this to her. Getting closer, Jamiron pointed out that Inez herself said he couldn't climb up, so he'd have to drag her down with him. The guy confessed that our girl's scent just drives him wild, so none of this is his fault. Our main girl's eyes drifted over to Joseph's lifeless body. Jamiron immediately smirked, because Inez dared to think about another man while standing next to him. He threatened her right then and there, saying if he reported this incident, Inez would be shipped straight off to Romfield. Turns out, he's about to become a warden there, and when that happens, Inez will be completely his. The main girl yanked her hand away and snapped at him to stop talking nonsense. The baronet's gaze hardened instantly, and he snarled, asking how the lady dared defy him. His hand shot up, and then the deafening crack of a slap echoed. The main character didn't make a sound, just glared at Jamiron. Confusion flashed across the guy's face. He hadn't expected this seemingly fragile dame to stay on her feet. Suddenly, Inez bolted. Jamiron immediately took off after her. Catching up quick, the guy tackled the aristocrat to the ground and pinned her, not letting her get away. Then he declared that Inez belonged to him, that from the start he knew she'd become his most special creation. The main character didn't respond, just glared daggers at him, but her eyes flicked to the knife the second Jamiron said he'd felt this way since their very first meeting. Inez snatched up the weapon while the guy kept spewing his garbage, and without hesitation, she used it. Crimson blood instantly splattered the green grass. Jamiron screamed bloody murder, clutching his shoulder where the knife was sticking out. Then he snarled, threatening to kill Inez right then and there, reaching for another knife with his good hand. The main character just smirked, asking sarcastically if Jamiron really thought she'd die by his hand. Inez decided she'd rather end it herself than let anyone else do it, but the guy roared that she wouldn't dare. Suddenly, a voice boomed out, ordering them to seize that guy immediately, and Jamiron's eyes went wide. Knights burst from the bushes, shouting for Lord Winningstone to be arrested on the spot. In a flash, Jamiron was disarmed and pinned to the ground. One of the knights offered the main character a hand up, asking if she was all right. The guy explained he was a knight sent by the Lord himself. The main character couldn't figure out how Carson had found out about this. As soon as the young woman was up, she immediately looked over at Joseph, who was gone. Taking her time, Inez walked over to him and quietly called his name. In her past life, The main character didn't even have time to mourn her dead husband. Not after she'd let him go with such finality. Inez gently touched his cheek and whispered that it couldn't end like this. It took 12 years for the girl to truly grieve for her husband. Carson was met with a beautiful view of a lake surrounded by forest, with huge mountains in the distance. The man immediately recognized it as the lake in Rasonia. Suddenly, footsteps nearby caught our hero's attention. It was a young woman with short hair, heading somewhere, and Carson found her very familiar. Taking a closer look, the hero realized it was Inez. Out of nowhere, she walked into the lake and started grinning like crazy, staring up at the cloudy sky. The guy instantly yelled, telling her to stop right there. But Inez didn't stop. She just kept going, deeper and deeper into the water. With her last step, the young woman turned around and asked Carson for forgiveness. And then, right in front of the 8th prince, she completely disappeared under the water. Carson's eyes snapped open, waking up from the nightmare. Then, he shot straight up, feeling his heart pounding in his chest after that terrifying experience. Once he realized it was just a dream, he felt this huge wave of relief wash over him. Another trial was coming up real soon. This time, the accused was Inez Swendon. But besides her, Jameron Winningston was also facing charges. The judge announced the start of the trial for the murder of Joseph Benoit. He gave witness John Camerfield the floor to speak his piece. The knight testified that he was escorting Lady Inez Swendon on the Lord's orders, as his lord was deeply concerned for her safety. The prince knew that this guy had been a real problem for Lady Inez and the princess back at the hunting festival. John asked if he could first clarify the situation surrounding the incident. On the day it happened, he and Sir Toman were on guard duty near the Swendon mansion. They were patrolling the area, completely unaware of what was about to go down. But then they saw Lady Swendon, climbing the mountain all alone. The knights had a bad feeling, so they immediately followed her. They didn't try to stop the young lady, because Lady Swendon was with Sir Joseph Benoit, who was trailing behind her. The judge wanted to know what those two were up to. John explained that he'd overheard their conversation by accident. Based on what they were saying, the guy hiding behind the tree figured it was just a lover's quarrel. But at some point, unable to win the argument, Sir Joseph charged at Lady Swendon with his hand outstretched. And then suddenly, he was hoisted into the air, like he was hanging upside down from a noose. The main character confirmed that she was the one who set the trap. Her parents were horrified to hear their daughter's confession. John kept telling the story, then Lady Swendon walked up to Joseph, holding a rope she'd prepped. My guess is, she was going to hang him and make it look like a suicide. As soon as the crowd started buzzing, the judge slammed his gavel and told everyone to shut their traps. Then, he asked Lady Swendon what she'd done with that rope. The knight answered that the lady hadn't done anything, she just let Sir Joseph go. After that, Sir Joseph got down on his knees and started begging Lady Swendon for forgiveness. But just then, Winningston jumped Sir Joseph with a knife and stabbed him in the ribs. Jameron instantly started yelling that it was all a lie, that they were in cahoots. But they shut the defendant up real quick. The main character admitted that everything Knight John had said was the honest truth. The judge decided to ask the young lady a few questions, starting with why she wanted to off Joseph Benoit. Inez answered honestly that the guy had completely wrecked her life. The main character also confirmed that the trap found at the scene was definitely meant to take out Joseph. The judge followed up, asking why she backed out of the hit she'd planned so carefully. Right then and there, the courtroom doors burst open. The main character spun around, totally surprised by who walked in. It was Lord Carson, who apparently decided to get involved in this whole mess.